Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Urban explorers of Reddit, what is your creepiest/most horrifying experience? Went to an abandoned hospital. There was a large square staircase spiraling up to the roof on the outside of the building, locked steel door at the bottom, so the only way up was to climb on the outside up to the first landing. My friend boosts me up, I climb over, and there's a sleeping bag with a steak knife next to it on the landing. I call down, we're definitely not alone here, dude. No, but it's cool, says a voice behind me, scaring me, and causing me to jump and whirl around. There's a young dirty homeless looking guy standing there, coming down the stairs from above, hands up palms out. Didn't mean to scare you. He takes a seat on the stairs, so I carefully step on the handle of the steak knife, lean over the edge, and pull my friend up. We had planned to sit on the roof and drink beer, so we offered the homeless guy a beer, which he gratefully accepted, and we shot it on the landing for a while. We're talking about the city, the police officers, traveling, life in general. He's basically a drifter, been in town for a week or so, but a nice guy. Things are going pretty well when he asks, "You guys are human, right?" I hate it when I meet people that end up being aliens, and you never know until you peel their skin off. They've been after me a long time, they don't stop, they never stop. Sometimes I think I should just kill everyone to be safe. He's definitely not joking, and there's an uncomfortable silence as my friend and I realize this guy is weird. "Yeah man," I say, "we're human, we just wanted to check out the place and drink some beer. We're going to go ahead and move on now, we definitely don't want any trouble." He just stares in silence, so we leave him the last beer, carefully back up to the railing, jump down and walk away very quickly, constantly looking back over our shoulders. The entire time, he's just standing there, still, and silent, watching us leave. That place is still abandoned, 5 years later, and we've never been back. I'm not a believer in the supernatural, but humans can be deceptive and dangerous in ways you can't see coming. A group of my friends and I explored an abandoned asylum/mental hospital a couple of years ago in the OKC metro, very unsafe at night for silly college first-year student like us. The first experience we had was when all of us were taking our merry time enjoying the darkness around. You have to come in through a broken window, and we were all gathered at the window just being dumb when we heard loud, echoing footsteps down the hall running towards us. We all did that "who the heck isn't here? Who's messing with us?" look and turn, and, after realizing we're all present and none of us are sprinting down a dark abandoned hallway, booted out of there. The second time, we could hear a group of people messing with us, jumping from around corners and such, but they never got too close. We assumed it was an animal at first, but got brave, and realized it was a person. We managed to catch them and, after staring at a collection of seemingly drugged-up 20-somethings, who begged us for cans of paint and cigarettes, we got the not-so-good vibes, finally, you say, and tried to leave. The leader of the haunted asylum cronies asked if we had jewelry, which we denied. He then said the creepiest thing I've heard in my life. "I like jewelry. I take it off the girls here when they sleep." We bolted. This happened 8 years ago when I was a sophomore in high school. My urbex friends and I were on a bike ride looking for cool places to explore in a relatively dilapidated area when we discovered a really creepy cave, an old, abandoned cement mine we later learned. We did some mild exploring that first day but quickly realized it would require more gear to thoroughly explore, flashlights, respirators, etc. About a week later 5 of us came back with the proper gear and a camera to see what we could find in the mine. We discovered there was basically one main shaft that sloped downward and deeper into the earth, so we followed that main route. It was wide enough for a car to drive down and was pretty well graded, so the walking was easy. There were many rooms, old machinery, and rusting equipment off of this main shaft, but we mostly avoided it in the beginning. We were trying not to get lost or confused. Along the way the walls were littered with the classic abandoned graffiti, "X was here," swastikas, initials and dates, phallic drawings, etc. As we got deeper and deeper, though, the graffiti really thinned out. At this point, the light from the entrance was long gone and we were relying solely on flashlights. The air was so stagnant and hazy with particles that the light from our flimsy flashlights would only go 20 feet or so before getting totally obscured by dust. Thank goodness for the respirators. The glow sticks we had brought to mark our way to prevent getting lost were also basically useless because they would disappear in the haze only a few steps after dropping them, and we had only brought 10 or so. At this point we started arguing among ourselves. Several of the crew were nervous about going any deeper with the air quality being so terrible, and without an effective way to prevent us from getting lost, we were probably a quarter mile into the earth now. The rest of us managed to overcome that sentiment of fear by assuring them that the path was easy and straightforward, so we'd have to try to get lost. We were going to rely on our level-headedness, sense of direction, and flashlight battery life to get out. Despite the agreement to push on, it was becoming very creepy for everyone. We walked for a while in silence, hearing nothing but our own movements and the steady drip of water coming from somewhere deep in the cave. I think we were all pretty scared at this point, but no longer willing to admit it to each other. Then we stumbled across something that all made us stop cold. Dug into the side of the deep stone shaft we were slowly descending was a tunnel, an offshoot. It was narrow, you'd have to crouch to go through it, and it was also a good few foot off the ground, so it required a scramble to reach it. But that wasn't what made us stop. It was graffiti. We hadn't seen any for 10 minutes or so and had assumed the artists never came this deep. But someone else clearly had, and the message they left was ominous. The tunnel was lined with words written in white, all of them somehow relating to death and destruction. Scrawled throughout the tunnel were words like suffering, pain, plague, disease, and hell. It was pretty terrifying. Who else would come this far just to write such a terrible message in a mysterious tunnel that broke from the main path? But there was no turning back now, we had to see where the tunnel led to. Despite our fear, we were overpowered by intense curiosity. So, one by one we crawled through the tunnel to the other side. What we found was a strange, flooded chamber. Around the pool of water were many large stones, each covered with dozens of burned-out tea candles. There must have been hundreds of used tea candles in the place. The walls had a few creepy monster faces with poorly graffiti on them, and the tunnel entrance back to the main shaft was ringed with a spray-painted blood-stained mouth. What was this place? Some weird ritual site for local Satan worshippers? An elaborate hoax set up by a bunch of kids. We couldn't find much evidence to figure it all out, and we were running out of adrenaline to keep exploring. We all crawled out of that weird hellhole and back into the main shaft, where we promptly headed towards the exit. When we finally saw that pinprick of natural life coming from the real world outside, we were flooded with relief. We never figured out what that mysterious cavern was for, and I think I'm content to leave it a mystery. No, we didn't hear any monsters in the depths of the tunnel or find any bloody Satan praise themselves, but just finding that room, buried deep in an old forgotten mine, was enough to creep all of us out for a long time. Nothing big, but I was once exploring a drainage tunnel with friends. We were pretty deep inside of it and turned a corner to see someone leaning against the wall with a hat on. It ended up being a sandbag. Someone dressed up, but scared me because it was pretty deep in there. There were pants and shoes and a jacket with a hat on it. I don't know what they did to make the jeans look like legs, because I didn't touch them or go back. A friend of mine went back and told me it was a sandbag, and I was already done for the day. We were kids exploring an underground flood channel. There were spots where we could climb up and dangle our arms out of the storm drains on the street, but that required crawling up weird diagonal tunnels. There were 4 of us, maybe 12 years old. 1 flashlight. The walls were all graffitied with a lot of gang stuff, and even warnings to turn back, blah blah blah. We just took it as other kids that were bored. We got to the spot where the ceiling angled down quite low to the point the opening was so small we had to crawl to continue. Challenge accepted. It looked like it opened up again shortly. So, we crawled through 5 to 6 feet of the low area, and when it opened back up, it looked like we were in a large round concrete pipe, before it was square or rectangular. Still lots of graffiti. We started yelling and playing with the echoes, then we thought we heard something, so we got quiet. Then a really loud "you are going to die" came echoing from the darkness. The kid with the flashlight ran so fast and the rest of us were left in absolute darkness. Anyways, this was the first time we went past the low spot, but the last time we went down there. None of us died that day. The rest of us ended up quietly and slowly walking out in the darkness. Not urbex, neurex I suppose you could call it. I was working on a project for a photography project, and there's a massive forest up a mountain near where I live. Said forest contains an abandoned hospital that was shut down after an unexplained death. No, I am not joking. So, it's a dreadful day, weather-wise. I'm Inkwood with a camera and a packed lunch, ready to go wandering. After a few hours, I found a small camp, with some abandoned tools, including a massive bolt cutter. Someone had tried to destroy them in a fire, but that was a no-go. Maybe 200 to 300 meters away, I found a burned-out car. Not an uncommon sight in the area, kids buy super shitty, clapped-out bangers, and trash them up there. Not far away, about running distance, I found a pair of women's jeans. And a little bit further away from that, maybe 5 meters or so, there was a pair of panties, hanging off a low branch. They'd clearly been there for a while. I'm not sure how long underwear would last exposed to Irish weather, and these were right out in the open, but a few weeks maybe? Pretty creepy, finding all that, all alone in the woods. I flipped through local news for anything on any break-ins or assaults or anything suspicious and couldn't find anything that had happened recently. I did contact the police, but they pretty much told me it was just littering, no actual evidence of any wrongdoing. I had one creepy experience I already told, but my friends who always go exploring told me about this time. They were just following a trail that went into the hills, and after almost reaching the freeway, they ended up near an old closed-up train tunnel. They were able to squeeze through some loose fencing, and after wandering through with nothing of interest, they eventually came to a bunch of shipping containers. They told me that when they glanced inside, they saw a ton of guns and ammo in one and just a ton of heavy boxes in the rest. After a few minutes of checking it out, they heard voices from further down the tunnel coming closer, so they got out of there. They also said it almost smelled like the ocean towards the end, so the tunnel might have led out near the beach. Edit/update, some added clarification for those who asked. The place they hiked to was somewhere between Santa Barbara and Oxnard in California, as they stopped on the 101 going southbound and started their hike and ended up returning to the car and going to Oxnard at the end of the day. They made a report to the police, but I haven't heard anything coming of that on the news or otherwise. Also, some people said it might be smugglers, but given that the crates were unlocked, the tunnel was unguarded, and it was accessible to anyone who wandered out there, I doubt that's the case. If it was, they were either just about to take off or they were really stupid. Rural area, landscape photography. Happened upon a long abandoned house and set up to snap a few images. Look in the window. It is perfectly furnished, piano, with music open, fishing gear, wood stove with firewood nearby, magazines on coffee table, jackets on coat rack, roll-top desk, open with neatly stacked papers, family photos, small kitchen table with red top and matching chairs, and one is pulled out. It was all covered in inches of dust. It looked like someone walked out in 1950 and never returned. Last winter I went into this abandoned parking lot under a closed shopping mall. It had 2 levels. The upper level had a bit of sunlight going in through the windows, but the lower level was pitch black. I made my way down this wide ramp that the cars would use, and I decided to have a look at the bottom level. After turning my flashlight on, I noticed that the space was huge, much bigger than the upper level. I remember how the light danced through the many supporting pillars and cast vivid shadows. I said hello and I'm just taking a look around just to make my intentions clear, but was met with no response. So, I decided to walk around for a bit, but couldn't see anything of interest, just a lot of junk, some empty old bottles, but nothing that might indicate someone living or hanging around there. The place seemed completely abandoned, however this uneasy feeling that someone might be hiding in the pitch black shadow of one of those pillars took the better of me and I climbed back up the ramp. I left taking a different route and passed under an overhead clearing that snow had fallen through. Just as I was about to hop the fence and leave, I noticed that the patch of snow that had formed had footprints in it. I know this doesn't really sound horrifying when you read it, as the logical explanation was that some poor chap had probably taken shelter from the cold inside the lot. But still, being there creeped the hell out of me. Went to a closed-up mental hospital in my city with some friends at night. Everything was cool until we got to the basement, where there were 5 meters wide and 4 meter high lit tunnels going far in both directions. We headed down one end and found a huge active generator, then we went the other way, and as we were about to hit another intersection, we saw 2 men wearing full green attire and face masks walking at the end of one of the corridors at 2 a.m. We got out of there really quick. I was exploring a certain abandoned mill near a large city on the coast with a friend. We snuck in, messed around a bit, and realized that we only had one flashlight. Took turns, weird noises, dark inside because there's no power, evidence of homeless occupation and empty needles. Real horror game material. We come up stairway and turn a corner ahead is a walkway bridge, aka the way to the rest of the building. To the right is a pitch black room that doesn't feel genuinely nice. As we walk towards the bridge, the flashlight picks out a sign that says "T.O. Hell," and points towards this dark room. We didn't go in. Didn't feel right. My friends and I used to explore this old factory/processing plant, no idea what it was originally. Anyway, it had lots of underground sections which were pitch black even a couple of meters from the entrance, but which also required going down a flight of stairs. One time we found a burned out car 2 to 3 levels down, no idea how it got in there, but that was kind of creepy. Another time we found a hole. We didn't bring torches, flashlights, with us because we're idiots, but we had lighters and were trying to figure out what the hole was or if it could lead anywhere. We put a stick in there and it ended up being at least 6 feet deep, but we also learned that it was full of some liquid and if we had fallen in could have easily drowned in the dark. Another time we went a couple of levels down and one of us at the bottom started screaming shrieks of absolute terror and the rest of us thought we were all going to be murdered. We all started running. Everyone was screaming at this point. There was this sludge the ground and some of us slipped and fell just like in a god horror movie, slipping and sliding, our limbs out of control. Again, there's 6+ people screaming bloody murder with absolute fear and terror on their faces, so we all thought we were going to get murdered. Turned out a bird had made a nest down there and my sister got spooked and my friend screamed. There was an abandoned hotel I was checking out, gained access through a blown out window near the indoor pool. Smells like death inside, come to find a couple of bloated dead deer in the slime collected towards the deep end of the pool. That should have been my sign to go. I make my way into the lobby and banquet areas, come across a couple of raccoons and squirrels who scurry away swiftly. Everything is destroyed, even the reception desk has been ripped in half. Nothing interesting to photograph, just trash. Neat little piles of trash. After a bit of searching, I find the stairwell. There's an odd noise coming from above that I brush off as rain. I decided to skip a couple floors because they're probably in the same condition as the lobby and a lot of the exterior windows had been blown out. I get to 4 and open the door, not worried about noise as I'm confident that I'm the only sober person on premise of not the only person. As I pull the door open the rain noise suddenly ceases, completely. I point my flashlight down the hallway and see hundreds of geese poke their heads out of the guest rooms. I remember the moment where nothing moved and we just stared at each other as lasting several minutes, though I'm sure it was about 10 seconds. Here I am, in the middle of the hall, geese of abandoned luxury staring me down. Once the initial shock of the sight wears off I remember I'm only looking at half of the floor. Behind me the geese aren't pulling a deer in the headlights, they're coming towards me. Time to go. I closed the stairwell door behind me, only muffling the cacophony that erupted once I moved. As I hustled down the stairs, I realized the signs were there, goose everywhere. I hit the lobby and turned towards the pool where a group of geese had collected as if they were trying to trap me. Luckily, they're just dumb birds. I got out to find the exterior of the hotel swarming with them. There was one lone sentinel standing on the roof, honking out a shrill command that the perimeter had been breached. I should have stayed to get more pictures, but I was done, covered in filth from a slip down the stairs, and didn't want to collect afresh from the dive bombers circling overhead. Exploring an abandoned construction site. It's a site out in redneck country that's got a bunch of old construction vehicles getting overgrown with plants and my GF and I decided to go check it out, see what it's all about. We look around and don't see a whole lot. It was about to rain so we decided to head out. As we are getting in my car my GF freezes and says, "There's a guy in the woods watching us." I ask if she's sure. She repeats herself and says he saw her see him and laid flat on the ground to hide himself. I live in a large African city which still has a fair amount of undeveloped/undevelopable space, and one rule to remember is that there is always someone else there that you may not see. There are people who sit alone, very quietly, in bushes or between boulders and other such places. They are, I think, harmless and don't do anything, but what they are doing has been a mystery to me for the 10 years I've been here. Most of them are too well dressed or well taken care of to be homeless. One thing that is annoying is that they stare at you, or at least they don't hide the fact that they are watching you. I swear if there was some completely inaccessible cave high up in a cliff here requiring professional scaling equipment to enter, they would find a local African guy just chilling inside with no discernible means of how he got there. I went to the abandoned living complex in PA called Concrete City. Walked around a bunch of buildings. At one point, one of my friends yelled, "Rich, come here." I ran over and there they were, two little kittens on a staircase with the word Cloud Swag spray painted above them. We brought them home and I kept one. He still terrorizes me every day. When I was in college, a few friends and I went to this local abandoned hotel. It was a swanky place back in like the 50s, but had just been sitting around abandoned and fenced off ever since. We walked by and saw an open window on a second-story ledge and ended up finding an old wooden ladder nearby on the property. We went in and hung around and saw a bit of great graffiti. The whole place was trashed with actual garbage as well as bits of the building that were falling apart. We made it up the staircase to the third floor looking in each of the rooms. The area we were in used to be the housing for the staff of the hotel. The third floor was covered in garbage from throughout the years. We got to the last room on the third floor and looked in to find a lit candle with no one else around. Realizing we were not alone, we booked it out of there and once we were outside, looked up to see someone watching us from one of the windows. Now we went to college in a city with a significant homeless problem and assumed we had just stumbled onto someone's home but still freaked us out. They cemented up the place after another explorer fell down an open elevator shaft and broke his legs, and it has recently been renovated and they are turning it into an apartment building. Not the creepiest find, but definitely freaked us out in the moment. I used to be really big into Urban Explorer when I was younger. After I got older I hitchhiked across the USA multiple times and stayed on the road for a little over 3 years. One of the most memorable experiences. South of Omaha, me and 4 other hippies made camp at night in a field of weeds next to a railroad track. We woke up in the morning around 6 a.m. and one of the guys was like, "Do you smell that? Smells like kush." We all were like, sure, go back to sleep. But then another guy was like, "Holy shit, it does smell like kush." Annoyed I get out of bed, get up and grab my flashlight. I shine it around and notice all the plants around us look sticky. Intrigued I got closer and realized we camped in the middle of someone's gorilla grow patch of MJ. Sure enough we all got up and started looking around and even found very well hidden water lines, barbed wire, etc. We started to think about grabbing some of it and taking it with us, but then we heard a gunshot far off and we all froze. Immediately after we heard dogs barking and the sound of someone moving through the field. We started to rationalize that it was just someone hunting, but then there was another gunshot, and it was much closer than the first. Suffice to say we grabbed and ran down the tracks, half of us barely clothed. My wife and I and a friend of ours were exploring an abandoned state-run school for troubled youth with a very nasty history that includes the torture and death of some of the students. Behind the campus through some woods was a gravesite with a couple dozen simple crosses to mark the graves. My wife and I were working on photographing the crosses and our friend was wandering around the gravesite probably 50 feet away from us. He hurries over to us with eyes as big as saucers and tells us he saw someone in the woods watching us. Considering how we were not in our hometown, trespassing, and near a county jail, we packed our gear up quickly and started heading back the way we came. We would stop every so often in the woods between the gravesite and the school to watch and listen. I never saw the person that was supposedly watching us, but I did hear someone else walking through the woods after us. Edit, remembered another time we were exploring an abandoned warehouse. We just got in and were walking around the large storage facility in the back when we heard what sounded like a can getting knocked over coming from the offices in the front of the building. We decided to check out the noise before we went to explore the place and photograph it. All 3 of us sneak up to the front of the building. I take the lead and start navigating the hallways as quietly as possible looking for the source of the noise. I look into one of the offices expecting to find a cat or some other sort of stray/wild animal only to find a person kneeling in a corner of the room, facing the corner, and rocking forwards and backwards. I turned back to the group, gave the signal to get the hell out, and we ran for it. Me and two of my friends were checking out an old fort on the coast. Rumors of it being haunted and people who do go there all return injured in some fashion drew us there. It was the middle of the day when we managed to climb into the place, but was still really still and creepy. So, we split up, obviously not learned from horror movies, and start looking round the courtyard and the battlements, and I find the remnants of a fire. I notice what looks like letters that have been burnt. I pick some of these up and they piece together to reveal that the recipient of these letters was released from prison for good behavior but wasn't allowed to see his kids. Then there were increasingly urgent requests for this guy to check in with the authorities. Lastly, separate from the fire, I find a handwritten letter with a rock on top of it to prevent it blowing away. This seemed to be from this guy's ex, who refused to let him near his kids because what he has done is unforgivable. This is the point where I become increasingly aware that I am alone, and my friends had ventured into the bowels of the fort, which were hollowed out parts of the cliff. So, in I go in the pitch black of these tunnels, not knowing whether I'm going to bump into my friend or some sort of psychopath. Eventually I found one of them and explained what I found. We start jumping at every noise before we find my other friend and leg it out of the place. One friend broke 2 toes, the other dislocated his shoulder climbing out, and I have an enormous scar from where hip was cut open. Very creepy place. My friends and I broke into an old Nazi bakery that used to be a part of the Sachsenhausen concentration camp complex. This is just outside of Berlin. At one point we randomly heard footsteps walking around inside and we weren't sure if it was our imaginations, a drifter who had followed us in, or a ghost. We picked up wooden boards and blocks of concrete and other debris around us to use as weapons just in case. Edit, for the curious, I have more urban exploring stories about weird places like this. Berlin and northern Germany in general are full of abandoned buildings and sites. I also went to an abandoned 19th century hotel on the Ostsee once. Me and a few friends decided to explore this abandoned child's hospital we'd heard about, which was in a small village about an hour from us. We get there and it's this huge plot of land, trees surrounding the whole place and the building in the center, creepy looking. We had to climb up a wall to get inside, as we couldn't get in on the ground floor and had to go through a window that was ajar. After climbing through, the place is a mess, rubble everywhere, but it looked completely desolate as if no one else had been inside in years. Anyway, we basically went straight up to the roof, sat, and had a few beers, then went home. I decided to go back a few days later with my girlfriend to have a proper look around because I wanted to explore it. We went into the building and immediately there was a different vibe unlike the other night. We jumped over the broken staircase to get to the ground floor. This was next to a large heavy-duty wooden door with multiple bolts and chains over it, and found a trapdoor with a ladder underneath which led to the basement. I convinced my girlfriend to come with me, but she wouldn't explore her basement when we were there, just stayed at the bottom of the ladder with her torch while I had a quick look around. That's when it got really scary. I walked past some machines into the small room, which was completely empty with the exception of a kicked-over chair and a noose hanging from a pipe directly above the chair. I turned round to leave, when on the wall there was red graffiti, not prepared to believe it was blood because there was a lot, saying "Don't come back." Needless to say, I haven't been back. My girlfriend told me after she felt like I was gone for about an hour, when I was only 5 out of 10 minutes, and she kept hearing whispers from the dark corridors and the trapdoor fell shut above her at one point, for no apparent reason. Very scary place, would love to go back with more people, but that me up. Back in the day my friends and I would always go to this boarded up hospital and play in it. The only problem was all the doors were locked and all the windows were boarded. However, there was this shed that you could climb up and jump onto a car cover thing, and there was a window that was broken where you could get in. We had been in this hospital so many times it wasn't creepy at all anymore. Well, one day we decided we would go explore the basement that was always flooded, and we would actually try and walk down the super dark hallway that was down there. The water was probably 4 feet deep and murky, so you couldn't see the bottom. My friends and I started walking down the stairs into the basement and are shining our flashlights down into the hallway trying to see anything. All we can see is this thing that looked like a generator and shelves, but can't see too far down the hallway. We finally muster up the courage to bring our descent into the water, but something doesn't feel right. The water was completely motionless, and it got incredibly quiet. So quiet I swear I could hear my friend's heartbeats. My friend put one foot on a stair that was submerged and then another. The water rippled as he continued to descend. Then out of nowhere we hear a huge splash into the water somewhere very nearby. The kind of splash you would hear if someone cannonballed into it. We immediately bolted back up the stairs. I peeked down into the darkness to see nothing but could definitely hear something coming down to the hallway towards us. We ran all the way to the second floor and jumped off the car cover thing so fast. We waited outside for a couple of hours and heard nothing and/or saw no one. We ended up going back inside and sitting at the top of the stairs listening for anything or anyone but heard nothing. The stairs were pretty dry by this point. One of my friends got a bright idea and threw the flashlight down the stairs into the water to try and scare whatever might be down there. After the flashlight made a splash from the impact, we heard nothing, and the light disappeared into the darkness of the water. After waiting for what felt like an eternity, we again found the courage to charge down the stairs screaming and hollering. We went to the base of the water and jumped in. Shining our flashlights down the hall made a ton of noise. Behind the generator was another hallway that was absolutely pitch black. We were standing in the water at this intersection when all of a sudden we see this large silhouette slowly moving towards us. It looked like two barrels standing next to each other on top of the water. Then another huge splash behind them. They split apart and started moving towards us super quickly. We ran and never returned to that place again. Me, my best friend, and my cousin liked to explore abandoned buildings and structures. At the time, we needed an abandoned location for a web series we were doing. We walked across a large, barren field to get to an old, worn-down house. There was even a small old barn right next to it. It seemed like the perfect location. We walked around the barn, and I was filming because I wanted to review the footage later to show the other people involved in the series who couldn't make it. After we looked through a substantial portion of the barn, I stopped recording, and we headed out. The next thing to explore was the house. However, there was something off about it. It certainly looked abandoned, but it didn't feel like it was abandoned. I noticed an orange extension cord and saw it led to a small window near the ground. I could tell it was in the basement and the light was on. I looked over at my friend and cousin and told them that I was fairly sure someone lived here. There was no garage and no car, but the light in the basement immediately told me that someone lived here. My cousin for some reason thought nothing of it and was going to try the door when, sure enough, a truck started coming down the driveway. So here we are, three teenagers standing right next to someone's house during the late afternoon with someone driving down the road. Me and my cousin immediately started to speed walk away from the house and towards the barren field. The truck pulled up near us and a middle-aged Mexican man got out. He asked us what we were doing, and I said that we were walking through the field. We're walking to a nearby neighborhood. He looked at us for a bit and we started to back up and went inside. That immediately put an end to our exploration that day. The thing that makes this story one of the biggest dodged bullets is what if my cousin broke into the house? What if I didn't notice the extension cable? Imagine all three of us in his house when he came home. Not sure if this counts, because I had to do it for work. I'm a water guy. I read meters and maintain infrastructure like water lines. Most cities and towns show water loss from month to month. We know how much water is left in the water plant, and we know how much got sold through meters and flushed from hydrants. Whatever doesn't get counted is the water loss. My town's water loss nearly doubled in 1 month to 12% loss. Something was up. There was a leak going somewhere and we had to find it ASAP. Water costs money, and the higher the loss, the more tax dollars get spent paying for it. We divided the town up into sections. About 40 of us split into teams of 2 men and searched each section all day. My section included an abandoned water plant. If you've never seen a water plant, Google it. It's like a large factory that is full of deep pools and huge pipes. The water plant hadn't been operational for about 15 years. There was no electricity, and only lighting came through a few small dirty windows. It looked just like a scene from the movies. I went in through the back door. It had rotted and fallen off the hinges, so we just walked right in. The ground floor was just concrete walkways that passed over the huge pools of water. They had rusty railings with life preservers hanging on them. It was eerily quiet except for our footsteps. The water was black and stagnant. The whole place smelled like an old musty basement. And at the end of the walkway, there was a metal staircase that went down into a dry pit that had some pumps and pipes. That's where the valves were located that isolated the plant from the rest of the water system. We shined our lights down into the pit and saw that nothing looked like it was out of place or leaking, so we turned around to hear back out. My coworker had been there before years ago and was talking about how the plant operated. He said there was a pretty cool laboratory upstairs, so we decided to check it out while we were there. We went up the metal staircase to the second floor and entered the lab. It was pretty cool. They had all kinds of glassware and stuff still set up from the day they shut down. It was all covered in dust. The floor was scattered with old papers and more. I'm nosy, so I opened file cabinets and desk drawers looking at all they left behind. The whole place was like a time capsule. There was a wall of lockers where the employees used to keep their stuff. I opened each one, but they were a disappointment, all empty. Along another wall were the bathrooms. The plant was built in the 1920s, and still had the original sinks and old-timey toilets. As a former plumber, I found that interesting. Beside the bathroom was another door. I assumed it must be a closet or something. The door was already open a few inches, so I flung it open to see what was in there. As soon as I flung the door open, a cat jumped out and made the loudest angry scream I've ever heard a cat make. The floors were concrete, so the cat was trying his best to run away but wasn't getting much traction on the slick floor. The cat screamed, I screamed, my coworker screamed, we all jumped, glass was breaking, we knocked over, and it was all echoing through the huge empty building. After we finished ourselves and realized it was just a cat, we laughed our asses off all the way back outside to our truck. It's got to be the most scared I've ever been in my life. I was already creeped out by the stagnant pools of black water inside a pitch-black building. It's like the feeling you get watching a scary movie and you know something might be about to happen. Fun times. A lone abandoned farmhouse in northeast Iceland, Longans. This was real edge of the earth stuff, a few hundred meters from the Arctic Ocean, about 10 kilometers from the nearest sealed road, and not a single soul for miles. I was on my own and just headed up to it for a quick explore. I was on field work up there for other reasons, went inside. It wasn't too messed up inside, there were not much furniture, some things left in the kitchen with a homemade poster saying Edermot 1982, a festival that celebrates the bringing in of sheep before the winter, so it was abandoned at some point after then. I was about to go to the top floor and heard a creak. Stopped and listened for a few seconds, nothing else. Fine. Went up 2 more steps, heard the creak again and genuinely 2 or 3 footsteps, or at least the sound of it. This really got the hairs on my neck up. Now, logically I knew there was essentially zero chance of anyone else being in there, and I enjoy thinking of myself as a reasonable, not easily spooked man. I went up 1 more step, then heard 2 more footsteps, and something slam onto the floor above. I legged it. Ran back down the stairs, out of the farmhouse, back into my Land Rover and headed off down the track. Never did find out what it was, felt stupid, but my love of horror movies took control of my brain and told me to run from footsteps in the attic of an abandoned farmhouse. At least I got a few good photos. I was working as a motorcycle messenger in LA. I had a delivery to an address in the bird streets behind the Chateau Marmont on Sunset. This is a ritzy hood full of 80-year-old mansions behind walls and gates. The address wasn't too far up the hill, maybe Oriole Street. I found the address. The gate is hanging open. I drive in. There's an old Jaguar with 4 flat tires sitting in the circular driveway. The Jag obviously hasn't moved in years. The grounds, however, are not overgrown. Most of the windows on the mansion are broken though. And the front door is hanging open. I bang on the door and yell, no response. I walk in. The place is a ruin. It's wintertime. It's dusk. There's a drizzle. I walk through the mansion. The fancy parquet floors are warped and rotting. The walls are peeling. A chandelier has fallen from the ceiling. I walk up a once grand staircase. The banister has collapsed. Several risers are missing. I go upstairs. There are at least a dozen bedrooms. Funny thing is, there's no creeper vines. No signs of rodent incursion or bird nesting. There's at least 12 bedrooms on the second floor. All empty, except one, which has a super jumbo king-size box spring and mattress, sitting on the floor. The bed is neatly made with cheap Walmart sheets and blankets. There's a milk crate nightstand and clip-on light. There are no ashtrays, no empty bottles, no discarded drug paraphernalia. There's a Gideon Bible on the nightstand. I call in, "You sure this is the right address?" Dispatcher reads back the address. I check the package. There's no name on the package, which I didn't notice before. I walk back out and check the curb for the painted address. I am in the right place. I call in, describe the setting. I'm not going to be able to get a signature. The dispatcher calls the customer. I stood by for a few minutes. "Leave the package on the bed," says the dispatcher. So, I do. To this day, I have never been able to track down who it was that was living so eccentrically at that address. Or what I was delivering? The package was a manila bubble wrap with a bulge in it. About the size of a pill vial, but heavier, like a gemstone. I went to Bachelor's Grove Cemetery and I yelled with some friends during the day, and if it's still open you should go. We didn't know the stories, but a few ghost hunters had their gear and told us different versions of the same tales of how the nearby pond was a dump for bodies and stuff like that. Classic graveyard. A photographer gave us the closest thing to the real story and said that he came there a lot for goth girl shoots and to get stock spooky photos. He never saw anything scary, but at night high school kids would come and party and sometimes weirdos would come and hurt animals, but that hadn't happened in years. We came back at night and saw some older kids slinking in with coolers and backpacks, so we started chatting with them. We got the cold shoulder, but we were theater kids and just bounced from group to group trying to break the ice till one of the ringleader types unzipped his book bag and showed us what looked like a robe and said, "You need to leave." I had no idea if it was something cult or if he showed me his picnic blanket and didn't want to share his bruise, but it worked. We noted it out. I guess no one has any reason to believe me, but a few years back, a friend and I were snooping around some allotments on the outskirts of our village, in the UK. It was about 11 p.m., so it was pretty dark. Not a completely pitch black dark, but dark to the point where, if you were to look at a tree around 30 meters away, all you'd see was its silhouette, but up close, you could see enough to navigate by. The allotment was surrounded on three sides by deep hedgerows, with trees and then fields beyond. I'm always super vigilant in these sorts of situations, so generally I'll stop regularly, and just listen, just stand as still as possible, and strain my ears for people approaching etc. My friend had crouched down, around 3 meters from me, to see what sort of plants were growing, and was pulling at a vegetable that was growing in the soil. Whilst I was listening, I began to hear a noise coming from the back corner of the allotments, maybe 20 to 30 meters away or so. The noise is really hard to describe. It was like a low-pitched sound, which sounded vividly like someone rapidly speaking in tongues, but it was odd, it kind of seemed smaller than a human voice, but deeper. Like an animal, but speaking in tongues. All different vowel and consonant sounds rolling over. It's really hard to describe, but I can hear it vividly when I try to remember it. My friend and I had a system of hand signals, but of course, he was focused on this plant. I was utterly convinced that this was going to be one of those things you hear or see, but by the time you've got someone's attention, the sound has stopped, and no one believes you for the rest of your life. I didn't want to move, risking drawing attention to myself, so I just stood, stock still, and made a short, sharp hiss-type sound, with my tongue. My friend looked up, and I signaled in the direction of the noise. It carried on. My friend and I just stood and listened, in silence, for about a minute, before it started to increase in volume. That was the point where we decided we'd done enough investigating. It carried on as we left. As it's a few years ago now, my sane head just says it was some kind of animal. A fox or something. But I spend a lot of time out at night, away from built-up areas, and I've never heard a noise that I could even morph into that. It was just this odd babble of what sounded like made-up words etc. But coming from a voice box that didn't sound human. At the time we had all sorts of theories. We knew it could have just been an animal. But there's also a lot of suspicious government installments in the area. Talk of a lot of hidden tunnel networks, and, if you're out at night, you'll often see a lot of strange lights over the hill in the distance. Ha, I sound like a conspiracy theorist. But my account above is true. My boarding school was located about a mile up a dirt road from an abandoned inpatient psychiatric care in the woods of New Hampshire. A group of us snuck up there a few times. The whole place just felt super creepy and haunted, abandoned gear everywhere, very unsettling. Some of us found an old film projector with a promo video reel there one time. The host was interviewing various hospital personnel and showing off the grounds. We had been watching it for a few minutes when someone kicked in the door and started yelling at us. It was only our friend pulling a prank, and he had a good laugh, until he looked at the film, and his jaw dropped. Seems his mom never mentioned she used to work in a mental institution. I'm not really an urban explorer, but I did some urbex with experienced friends. Since I live in Paris, we decided to go to the Paris catacombs, not really the best place to start as a newbie. So, we had to crawl under tight space, walk in water-filled hallways and all that stuff, but honestly it wasn't bad. We met some other nice people, had lunch etc. It was a pretty interesting experience since this is such a beautiful and weird place to be at. The horrifying part comes a few days after the exploration. While talking to a friend about what we did, I realized how dangerous and terrifying what we did was. I mean, we were I don't know how deep underground with no way to contact the emergencies if we got injured or lost, plus the fact that we had to crawl in tight space that could have been blocked when we were exiting the catacombs. We were alone in the dark, in a place that is supposedly not available to the public, and we were responsible for what could have happened to us. Just imagine being trapped here, a dark place with no way to contact anyone else outside, forced to wander around maybe until you die. No one can hear you outside and you can get lost so easily with all the different corridors. It's a god maze in the dark. You also never know who you could meet in those kinds of places. I know it's a different kind of horrifying and you might call me a coward, but Jesus Christ, I could have died there. There was an abandoned factory near a train station that recently has been torn down. A couple of years ago, when it was still standing, it was dilapidated and tagged all over. It looked nice and abandoned. After crossing the train track and hopping a few fences, we got to where a door once was. It was now a boarded-up hole. We cranked our crowbars to get it off, and once it did, we found a huge open space. Everything stripped, copper wiring and such, everything dusty, and wooden bits rotted. It smelled dank and mildewy, was so dark and seemed like no one had stepped in there in years. This factory was huge. We decided to pop out from where we had come and explore another side. Once myself and my 3 other friends came out, we searched along the sides to find another entrance. Then, a flashlight pointed at us. Oh no, the police officers. Goldmanite, I do not need a trespassing charge. Then, oh no, he has a gun. I wish this were a police officer and threat of a charge. We were huddled behind a hunk of scrap, and he was bellowing for us to get out. The fear I felt in that moment was unreal. Shaking, clammy, we stepped out. He pointed this bright-ass flashlight at us. His demanding voice went from a low growl to a more frantic, past-off one. Who are you? Why are you here? Do you know where you are, etc.? One of us, the calmest in our misguided Scooby gang, says confidently that we will leave and never return. Please let us. He says he will walk us out. Which was less walking us out, more so blinding us with his flashlight and directing us to jump the fences and walk away with his gun pointed at us. Having my back turned towards this weapon-wielding man was terrifying. My option was to do what he said and hope he wouldn't shoot, the obvious one. But having to trust that he won't mess us up while vulnerably climbing a chain fence in the dark will always stay with me. I don't know if there were people making meth maybe, or what was being done in that factory by its apparent occupants. It's now gone, but that memory gives me chills whenever I pass there. I have a few more instances with abandoned places, but this was the most traumatizing. Aside from the possibly paranormal experience in a giant abandoned building in the mountains, but that story takes a lot out of me and I'm not sure I will write it out. Here's the spooky ghostly one. Same group of friends and I would visit this big, multi-level building that was up in the mountains. It was supposed to be a rec center or country club, but it was stopped in the midst of construction because of outdated and hazardous materials being used. I believe asbestos/poisonous materials were the problem, and a building was built elsewhere while this one remained. Edit, financial reasons, not materials. The drive to get there is past some beautiful mountain homes and then up a half-mile long dirt road, but without any lights on so as not to disturb the neighborhood. We would go into this all-concrete and metal structure late at night, breaking open glow sticks and flinging them around the rooms and spray painting and other things. We frequented it until this incident. The group that had gone there was smaller than our usual April 5th and was just me and 2 other friends. We had gone equipped with a lantern and a flashlight, just going to hang out. The entrance were these huge metal doors. They were extremely heavy, taking 2 of us to push extremely hard to move them even a bit. They are always open. Everything looks normal. The usual amount of cigarette butts and general trash, doors open, no other cars or anything around. Everything looked as though no one was there. We enter a room about the size of a bedroom, I would say, that is directly to the right. This is one that is so dark and insignificant compared to the vast open spaces of the lower levels, so naturally the most fun to spray glow sticks and have glow in the dark. There is a comically creepy book that is a pretty old children's book. It is about Mother Goose, tells little tales that we've all heard. The illustrations are super weird looking. I actually haven't ever tried to find the book online and now kind of want to. Anyways, who doesn't love getting scared? So, one of my friends picks it up, because yes, we're keeping the creepiest book found in an abandoned building. We keep walking around inside and hear squeaks and screeches. This is in the mountains and is an old building. Whenever weird noises are heard, our minds go to 2 places. 1. There are animals, bugs, and clanky metal pieces all around. Of course, we're hearing things. 2. We are in an abandoned place at night. Anything heard is going to be scary. We all smoked at the time and went outside to the stairway that goes into a hole where there is a locked door, sat on the stairs and smoked. We heard little high-pitched screeches that almost sounded like they could be from a magpie. They crept us out, and we began to hear rustling and some sort of soft clamping. Very rhythmic, almost seemed like too much so for people walking. But, probably another person here, let's scope that out. We carefully walk the perimeter, but see no people, no cars, nothing indicating anything else. When we walk to the entrance, my friend jokes that the book is haunted and causing these disturbances. She says she better give it back, so the ghost won't get mad or something, throws it towards the entrance. It lands and opens. And flips a couple of pages. The night was very still, not breezy or windy, so we kind of started to freak out. We feel a little unsettled, not sure if we should go back in. Also lost our lighter, so we only have a flashlight as we can't light our lantern. Huge creak. Hughes Creek. One of the doors is shut. How that happened without us hearing is beyond my comprehension. We would have heard it. Loudly. The other door, this heavy-ass door that is hard to move even a bit, is closing on its own. Fairly quickly, it glides shut with a loud bang that makes us all jump. We booked it back to the car and haven't ever been back. Writing it out doesn't seem as scary as it felt, but when I think about it I get sick. I have horrible nightmares about this place where the outcome is much grislier, so that doesn't help. Edit, I mixed up my buildings. Just search this place online, it was closed down for financial reasons. It is the Echo Hills Club in CO. Kansas man here. My small hometown, 1000, had abandoned grain elevators. The town legend was that something bad happened there and it was abandoned in a single day and none of the old people would talk about it. Went in as a young teenager and sure enough, everything was left untouched. There was stuff in there like people coming to work the next day, but everything was covered in dust. Family pictures on desks in an office, expensive machinery, nice stuff. It was a very creepy place, and I still don't know why everyone left their things. It has since been opened back up by a new company. Okay, I worked in a film factory in Binghamton for a while. And of course when you're 20 and working a second shift, you get your work done, then you explore. So, my friend said he heard about an underground tunnel in a small outbuilding. We got some flashlights, head in, it wasn't locked, and sure enough there's stairs going down into the pitch black. Down we go. It was a steam pipe tunnel, very warm. A few minutes later, it turns 90 degrees, we keep following it. Come up in a room full of long-abandoned machinery. Okay, we're going to open the door and see where we are. We're in Narnia. That's the best way to describe it. There's trees and foliage and the night sky, and we're supposed to be in the middle of a city. My friend starts going to the left, I start going to the right. We're talking softly as we go, then I hear him say, Is that a doghouse? Suddenly, barking. Loud barking. We hightail it back to the door and slam it. The next day figured it out, there was a big L-shaped undeveloped area around a car repair place the next block over, with chain link keeping people out. The buildings themselves were overgrown with ivy, and there was brush and trees in it. And a dog. Creepy, but also hilarious. Smiley face. Fasten your bootstraps for this one. So, a good friend of mine is out on a bike ride with two other guys up the creek that runs through our city. As it gets up into the hills, the slopes on the sides get steeper as it turns into a canyon, forcing the path up some nasty switchbacks up and away from the river. Well, they decide that the switchbacks suck, and that the river is shallow enough to walk up further and explore. They walk up for a while, with the walls of the canyon getting higher and steeper, isolating them further from any effortless way in or out. As they start turning a bend in the river, they see a beach to their side, which is formed in a little forested area at the bottom of the walls. They figure they've found an awesome new hangout spot because nobody would ever come here. Well, the first one of them goes up to the sandy beach to take a pass and says, guys, you're going to want to see this. The obvious penis jokes ensue, but eventually they walk up the hill. The first thing they see is a ball gag, followed by a mask and some Gatorade bottles. Next is a massive strap-on, a whip and some other BDSM gear. Being the mature 20-year-olds they are, they start trying to flick it at each other and one of them puts the mask on and chases the others around. Then they notice a path leading into the small forest and figure that they might be back at the main pathway, and that this gear is just some kid's practical joke. Well, about halfway down the path it becomes apparent that is not the case, and they come out to a 100 square foot sandy area that has been totally cleared of rocks. In the middle of this, about a human wingspan apart is two upright poles stuck into the ground with eye-hole screws stuck in the top. All the rocks in the area have been carefully placed in a spiral, each with a smaller rock on top placed in the exact center. So, they have a look around and don't find anything else, but are pretty weirded out and make a vow to come back sometime over the next few days. I can tell the story of that second trip if anyone wants, it gets much better. Let's just say this place wasn't abandoned. Our university halls were next to an abandoned mental facility. Really old with a big driveway to it. The grass on either side had grown tall and out of control. As far as we knew, there were security staff to keep people out, but otherwise it would have been abandoned and derelict. Being 19 and living away from home with access to unlimited amounts of alcohol and drugs, of course we go exploring. It was just a rickety old building, creepy but nothing major. That was until my friend fell on the floor. Fortunately, it wasn't a bad fall. Unfortunately, there was an old reclining chair, medical sort of thing with leather restraints and a bunch of old-timey doctor laying around. The rest of the room was just dark. He's one of the toughest people I know, but the fear in his eyes was something else. We get out of there. Word is there are numerous tunnels that permeate the area from the hospital. Who knows why? We later camped in the woods nearby and found colored shapes nailed onto trees, only periodically. According to the security who worked at our halls, these were marking out search areas for escapees from the hospital. It's fairly high up and isolated in the north of England, so most escapees died of exposure. Most. An abandoned paper factory outside of Stockholm. The first floor of the building was pitch black due to almost all the windows being boarded up, but as every urban explorer knows, flashlight is a must-have. So, me and my friend flick them on and start exploring. There are many rooms that connect in diverse ways and the whole place seems quite maze-like. But after a brief time, we finally entered the church, as we would call it. It was one spacious room spanning 3 or 4 stories of the building with narrow tall windows. While this may have been enough to give it church-like qualities, the giant black cross painted on the back wall as well as all the chairs lined up in front of it only added to it. On one wall were the words Judas Baroque painted with the same black paint as the cross, and on a third wall just hell. Getting kind of evil cult vibes while also being excited for finding something like this gave a weird mix of feelings. So naturally we stopped to take pictures. Then we continued to explore. And I start thinking of this article I had read, which tells of kids or teens finding a kind of chamber with coffins as old as the 1700s in the deep forests of Söderman. Söderman is the state Stockholm is located in. I told my friend of this article while we walked up to the second floor. But then we came across a tarp wrapped around something on the floor and I pointed out that the shape of them eerily resembles coffins. It seemed to be wrapped around a whole row of coffins looking to be at least 10, or maybe even 15. And to my mind this could very well be the case. Don't have pictures of these, sorry. So, we walk around them keeping our distance when suddenly, I see the tarp rise up and the shape underneath it looks just like a hand. I get so scared I scream like a little girl, pardon the expression, and go back into some old furniture hurting my back. So, this really happened, and is not some no-sleep story. And while in the moment of true terror I really believed we were about to be attacked by vampires, it was only the wind blowing underneath the tarp which was only covering holes in the floor and had planks and poles laid underneath it and across it which made the shapes. My friend laughed at me, uneasy face. Me and a few friends went out almost every night in the summer holidays looking for abandoned places. One night we found an old morgue next to a hospital, another, an old factory-looking warehouse, and the last, what I can only call a village hall. The morgue was actually the least scary, because there were drawings all around the place and comments everywhere, but it was still interesting. The factory was huge, massive, we still go back there every now and then to try to venture to the top, but as it's completely rusted and falling apart we always wimp out. And the last, which was infected 5 minutes from my house, was the creepiest. Never have I been so shocked in my life. We found it by my S/O brother, 11, telling us there's an abandoned house down the road. At first we of course didn't believe him. He calls any house with a broken window abandoned, but he kept going on about it, and so soon enough we went and checked it out for ourselves, parked up outside it and it was overgrown and just dark. The door leading to the side alleyway was open, so we crept down there which led to an unlocked back door, which inside led to a tiny opening of 2 more doors. I was in the lead, so I made the choice to go to the left-hand side door, closest to me. The door was open, but not open enough to actually see inside, so I tried to look through the gap to see if I could see anything inside, keeping in mind it was pitch black right. My head is right next to the crack in the door. When I had no idea of what caused it, the door opened the smallest bit, and I could easily see inside, because the light was on. I noted there and told them all to just run. At that moment in my head all I could imagine was some guy on the other side of the door doing the exact same thing as me, trying to look through the gap. Every thought in my head was horrible. It was probably the wind as we actually went back there a week later to venture more and found some very weird clown paintings scattered all over the floor, but no one was inside. The place was dead, yet the electricity was still running, but that's for another story. Still creeps me out. Told exploring an abandoned hall when the door opened, and I thought I saw someone peering through the other side. Edit, I didn't realize how long this ended up being and I apologize, but I just remembered another one about the factory I mentioned, and I'll reply to this if it actually gets any attention lol. This isn't too creepy, but it's still a story. When we were like 15 or 16 we wanted to go to this abandoned industrial mill at the edge of this forest. There were about 5 of us. To get to the mill you had to get across this running stream, but you could hop across on rocks if you were agile enough. We got to the mill and couldn't find an open door, but we had a noise outside. We saw some giant metal machines in rooms full of exposed wires, as well as views into the inner bits of the building. Lots of chunks of metal and chairs hadn't really been ransacked and there was no graffiti. So, we were pretty psyched, feeling like we were the first ones there. We came to this boarded up window and kicked it a few times. It was nails on pretty tight but eventually it fell in. It fell for a second or two and hit the ground with a loud smash. When we looked in we couldn't see the bottom. I volunteered to go first and I sat on the edge and eased myself down, but my feet still didn't touch the ground, so I just jumped. I landed on top of the board, and it made a loud smash. All my mates asked if I was okay. Turns out we'd kicked in the original window behind the board, and when I jumped down it was really loud, and they thought I hurt myself. I turned on my headlamp and helped the rest of them down. So, in this building we were in the basement. There was a lift in the middle, a proper old-school BioShock type thing, and we pulled the trellis aside to go inside it and look. At the back was the panel, and when I shone my lamp on it, it had some proverb about owing our lives to God or something. Weird. Whilst I was looking at it, the room suddenly lit. I was dazzled for a moment. Turns out my friend flicked a switch outside, and the lights still worked. We went nuts. Super exciting. We heard a shuffling sound from upstairs. Since we were in the basement, we had to go up to get out. We were scared. At the end of the day, we were just kids. Resigning ourselves to an encounter, I picked up a nearby spade and we started creeping up the stairs. We heard the sound coming from behind a door. We busted through the door. Inside were like 10 builders and they looked straight at us, shovel in my hand. We instantly started running and we found an emergency door that opened from the inside, and we just ran and ran through the woods. Police passed us going the other way. I tripped over my shoelace when I saw them, and now I have a neat scar on my elbow from the fall. A couple since I live in a Rust Belt area with a lot of abandoned buildings. Walking through an abandoned asylum and finding an old building in the woods my friends and I didn't know was there. We walk in and the temperature drops noticeably. It is incredibly dilapidated and smells like asbestos. Turns out it was a high-security / solitary confinement building, which means everything there is encaged or nailed in. After leaving we see a figure move in the woods. Obviously, we think it's our friend, but realize we're all together and no one could possibly have moved like that. I look and there's nothing to be seen. On that same day, my friend Camden and I immediately felt something. I don't believe in ghosts, but something felt off in a way. It felt like we weren't supposed to be there. After following our guts and splitting off the group to leave, we got a text from our friend Maddie who says after we left the police officers showed up. Thank God we followed our gut. Not super scary, but my friend and I found a car underwater in our local lake. It doesn't sound creepy, but on a sunny day if you dive down and swim next to it, old station wagon, there is no sound and it feels like you're in a nightmare or horror movie due to the discoloration of the water. Imagine being in a movie with no sound. Just looking at this old ghost car really kind of got to me. Friend and I were scouting the Silver Dome when we found an old road that ran on the railroad near it. We followed it, and even though we were in a large suburban / urban area, it felt like we were in the middle of nowhere due to the swamps and other land around this old, abandoned railroad. We follow it to find a massive bridge that crosses a small creek. So, there we were at this massive bridge in the middle of abandoned land in the middle of the suburbs. Almost felt like we were being watched. I could tell a million other stories about urbex around Detroit, so PM if you're interested. Any abandoned building is pretty scary, but sometimes the creepiest, most horrifying thing is the neighborhood around them. Also, cops scare me. Anytime I have explored alone makes me look back and realize how scary it was, but for me in the moment it just felt like adrenaline. One day, my girlfriend and I were casually eating frozen yogurt in a parking lot. Enjoying this Sunday evening with lovely conversations until this creepy guy pulls in and rolls down his window. I was thinking, oh, it must be park security. Well, dumb me. I opened my window, and this guy looked me dead in the eyes and smiled. This smile is so creepy that I cannot get it out of my head. He then proceeded to light a cherry bomb of some sort and tried to throw it in my car. Luckily, he missed, and it landed on my windshield, caused the windshield to shatter. My girlfriend and I were in complete shock. We were both stunned. But I noticed this guy is reversing to the end of the parking lot and revving his engine. I was quick enough to realize he was about to slam right into me. So, I get out of the parking lot as quick as possible and the guy proceeds to chase me for a mile or so. But I lost him. That's a day I will never forget. A few years ago, I got a text from a friend while I was at work saying he found an abandoned house deep in the woods off of a trail. Then he tried approaching the house, but some old lady came up to him and told him not to go in there. This was on a Tuesday, and I told him I was at work, so we'd have to go that night. Night comes and I make my way over to his place a couple of cities over and we head down this trail to go find this house. This house looked as if it had been abandoned for years. It was in the middle of the woods, at the end of a long driveway surrounded by trees and darkness. I mean, you couldn't hear a single sound or see a single light. We walked around the house to try and find an entry point, but all the windows had been smashed in and replaced by boards, nails and 2x4s. Our only option was the front door, which was also boarded up and locked with a padlock. My friend decides we should try and break in since no one probably lives here and no one would be around to see us or even care. So, we hiked back down the trail to go find something we could use to break in. We ended up finding a park where the city had planted trees. We took the big steel rods planted around the saplings used to help keep them level while they grow and headed back towards the house. We got to the house and started trying to break down the front door. We're kicking and prying the padlock with the steel rods. It's now close to 3 a.m. in the middle of nowhere, deep in the woods on a Tuesday night. With every kick, the door is moving increasingly. We're getting a solid 2 feet of give with every kick, the wood is cracking, and we're almost in. All of a sudden, it starts getting bright, I mean really bright. Too bright to be the sun starting to come out. I turn around and see 6 trucks speeding down the driveway towards us. I yell at my friend and tell him we have to get out there. As the trucks pull up to the house, we race around in and sprint into the trees. This house happened to be at the top of a very steep hill, in the woods. We're running down it and tripping every other step because we're in complete darkness and can't see what's afoot in front of us. I look back and there are a bunch of men with flashlights following us, so I run faster. All of a sudden, I dropped. I feel a sharp pain in my left thigh and can't move. There was a sudden drop in the hill, and I landed on a fallen tree. My leg was bleeding, but the men were still following us, so I had to get up and keep running. When we reach the bottom of the hill, our feet are submerged. We're in a stream or small river of sorts. It's only knee-deep, so we cross it. Once on the other side, we find ourselves at the bottom of another hill. So, we climbed up and looked for an exit to the forest. Once, at the top, after what felt like an eternity of climbing, we see some light piercing through the trees up ahead. It must have been morning, so we headed over to the edge of the forest and found a cul-de-sac. We hear a car speeding towards us, so we hide in a bush and wait to see if the men in the trucks were coming to look for us on the other side of the ravine. It was a police officer, doing about 80 kilometers per hour in a small residential neighborhood with no sirens or lights. We wait for him to reach the end of the cul-de-sac and start walking towards civilization. For the next hour, as we were making our way back home, we must have seen 10 more police cars all driving around the neighborhood we were walking through. Every time we would hear a police officer, we would jump into a bush and wait for it to go by. We got back to my friend's place by 5:30 a.m. He was bummed that we never got into the abandoned house, but I was relieved. Had we been inside, I wouldn't have seen the trucks pull into the driveway and who knows what kind of trouble we would have gotten into. TLDR tried to break into a seemingly abandoned house in the middle of the woods at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. 6 trucks pull up. We get chased by a bunch of men with flashlights through the woods and then by a bunch of police officers on the streets. Under a church in my local town, there is this green door covering with no handle because it's a wooden real fake door, legit it's a door with no hinges etc. It's meant to just stop access into there. I'd like to mention the door is on the backside of the church bit and outside the church grounds. There is no road near it. One day me and my mates saw someone had smashed the wooden door thing to pieces. Typical teens, we wanted to explore, but me being me, I said we should research it. In our town, there are quite a lot of tunnels linking houses, shops etc. that are usually chained off, but a lot of them are still open and haven't been explored. This was the first one where we wouldn't have to ask a shop owner to have a look. I found that there were apparently all these ghosts including the Blue Drum Boy who got killed during a war in the early 11th century. My friend believes in all the paranormal, so he got his cross and ghost ready. I packed a 500 lumen torch to light up the place and had a backpack of batteries, a walkie-talkie and all the other essential things. Early hours, pitch black, we went in. Everyone was completely silent as we crept down the stairs. Suddenly, we all realized there was a 90-degree turn where we couldn't see the right. Everyone was scared to go first so my mate lit a red light flare and threw it in. Then, we all together walked in. There was a huge room with another doorway. We looked around the first room finding needles and blood. We carried on through the doorway and found a grate that had a ladder off it. Obviously, we were buzzing and thought what a great idea to cut through the lock and climb down the ladder. 3 out of the 4 of us were down when the larger of us all started climbing. It was rickety and kind of rusted, but it just broke when he was halfway. The exit from the ladder was a tunnel completely dry and pitch black, but he fell and shattered both ankles. Oh, and there was a bad stench. Yes, tough situation as we couldn't get back up there, ladder broke, and my mate couldn't walk, and he was the biggest guy. We had to carry him. Basically, when me and one other mate carried on, leaving the others to find help as walkie-talkies got no reply, we walked past rotting rat corpses, live rats, and a ton of bloodstains at one point. After about 30 minutes of walking, so about 1.5 miles, we found a crossroad. Straight left or right. Basically, left was dead end, right was dead end, but straight had a ladder. The ladder was rusted, and we were scared to climb it. I climbed up and found someone with a needle in their arm dead. Their faces were rotting, and I was about to be sick. The ladder led to identical rooms, but no lock on the grate. I went back down the ladder, got the others, and came back. We managed to get my larger mate up and out and took him to the hospital. We couldn't say where we went or talk about the dead guy because it would be trespassing. This just happened about a month ago. My friends and I were exploring an abandoned World War II ammunitions factory which was absolutely massive and already had creepy vibes. There was even more graffiti about death and murder because of the nature of the place than anywhere else I had been. So we come to this room, and keep in mind we are already 2 to 3 miles inside the complex, and there are tons of graffiti from one guy. It turns out it was the shrine of an infamously crazy local graffiti artist. There are bones hanging at different heights from the ceiling, a whole area full of dead baby birds, and graffiti saying to get out. As we are leaving, we hear some glass break behind us and see what I assume to be the crazy graffiti artist, probably on acid, as he normally is. We all bolted like there's no tomorrow and ran all the way back to the entrance we came in through, not caring about visibility and just running out into a major roadway. Went to an abandoned factory that was being prepared for demolition. This was at the core of a major city BTW. Seeing that the best time to go alone was after sundown, I find myself wandering around the main floor looking for the stairwell going up. My goal was to get to the rooftop since there was an abandoned billboard atop of it overlooking the freeway and some high-rises, so finding the right set of stairs was key. After walking around the bottom floor for quite some time using a tiny flashlight to guide myself in the darkness, I find a set of stairs to go up. The second floor is equally dark, but still I have decided to explore it as much as possible. The layout is genuinely interesting since it's a 100-year-old building. I noticed that every floor seems to have a different layout, so there's a lot to take in. I grew accustomed to using a small flashlight to cut through the darkness. I go up to the 3rd floor and make a right into a pocket of darkness. I can sense it's a big open space. And when I swing the flashlight, the first thing I notice is some type of pattern drawing on the walls. And I realize it's all drawn in red. Then I realize I'm in a room where the drawings are on all the walls surrounding me. Then it sinks in that the graffiti is actually symbols written in some glyph-like language. Then I recognize some symbols that look like your typical satanic drawings. Then I saw a mural depicting some really satanic hit on the pillars. Serpents, etc., glyphs. I think I froze for a good 10 minutes expecting to be jumped by some fanatics. Eventually, I did get to the rooftop and got some cool pics lol. There is a really strange building on the campus of the university I attended. It's called Basic and is split into 3 separate wings, biology wing, psychology wing, and zoology wing. Legend has it that 3 different architects were hired to create the building, one for each wing. The architects didn't communicate with each other at all, and the result is a very strange building with staircases that lead nowhere, closets that open up to stairwells, doors that open up to a concrete wall. Apparently if you put a sticky note on every window you could find inside, from the outside you'd still see windows without sticky notes on them. I lived on campus in residence for 3 years. One night me and some of my friends from my floor decided to explore Basic. Campus kept buildings open until 11. At first it was really fun. We found some weird things like I mentioned above, as well as a freezer claiming to have a Yeti inside it. Then it took a creepy turn. We were exploring the basement when we came upon a large closet. We looked inside the closet and it appeared that someone was living in there. There was a mattress on the floor, a backpack full of things beside it, and some clothes strewn about. We noted out of there pretty fast and continued exploring, but then began hearing footsteps behind us. Every time we looked back we wouldn't see anyone or anything, so we continued on. Then we round a corner and came face to face with an incredibly angry and disheveled-looking man. We all screamed and began to run the other way. As we're running we can hear the man yelling at us. We continue screaming and search for an exit. Finally, we get outside the building, and all start running for residence. One of my friends falls. We tell her it's every man for himself and keep running as fast as we can. In hindsight, it was probably just a homeless person that was living on campus, which is pretty common, but holy cannoli were it scary. Just 2 days ago I went on a little adventure here in northern Michigan. So, I had seen this old, abandoned home way off the road a few times and finally got up the nerve to explore. So, I parked in this field that was overgrown and made my way to the house. Behind the house there is an old building also that is collapsing at this point. So, I went in the front door which was unlocked and right away it felt creepy. I started talking loudly right away just in case someone was in there. To my left was a dining table with a bunch of family photos on it. I must say the entire interior looks like someone bailed very quickly a long time ago. They left most everything, a microwave, fridge, dishes, it's weird. I looked through some newspapers and the most current were from 1992. Now I had to go upstairs and here it is really weird. At the top of the stairs was a bedroom with a beautiful roll-top desk and papers on it that looked like someone had been working there recently. There was a huge closet with clothing as well as boxes of old magazines from 1989. In the other bedroom on the floor, it looked like someone had made themselves a bed out of old blankets and a sleeping bag, very creepy. I peeked in the bathroom and noticed someone had hit the floor in front of the toilet. I looked around a little more and made my way back to the main level. I did find a door to the basement and told myself there was no way I'm going down there. I swear I heard something moving around and they didn't respond to my yells. Let me just say I'm not a small guy 6'1" and 270, so I'm not afraid of much, but this creeped me. I left the house and went out back to the other building but didn't go in there. Funny thing, I did find a rusted 1932 Ford Coupe that still has potential. Now I'm going to say something, and you will all think I'm crazy, but when I walked back by the house to my car, I swear I saw someone looking out a basement window at me. I'm not sure about that, but it looked like a face. I want to go back, but not alone or unarmed. Scary place. I was riding around on my bike in winter, looking for places to explore. My hometown was a big industrial East Coast city, known for their brass manufacturing. In the southern portion of the city, there were lots of factories, and where there are factories, there is housing for the workers. Across the street from Brassworks, I had visited dozens of times. I noticed a house that was very vacant and obviously abandoned. It was 3 stories tall, with asphalt siding shingles colored in deep red, brown, beige colors that screamed 1970s. The first 2 floors had every window busted out, and even had the sash weights from the windows ripped out and scavenged for the scrap iron. But the 3rd floor, all the windows were intact. Intrigued, I made my way into the building. Extremely easy to do. Not only were there no windows, but there were also no back doors either. Only the front door remained. Walking through the building was not easy though, because the entire apartment was covered waist deep in garbage bags. Eventually I made my way to the stairwell and got up to the 2nd floor. I was met with the same situation, entire apartment filled with garbage. I worked my way to the back porches where there are usually stairs connecting all 3 floors. This proved to be the case and I wound my way up to the 3rd floor porch. When I got up there, I tried the door and found it locked, but as I looked away from the door, I saw that someone had taken a heavy-duty orange extension cord and grafted it into the power lines coming from the nearby telephone pole. The cord had obviously been there a while because the parts of the cord that were exposed to the sun had bleached to a pale yellow. The rest of the dingy orange cord went into the house through a hole drilled in the wall. So, I thought to myself, okay, this place might have power. Interesting. Since I couldn't open the back door, I went back into the second-floor apartment, and I waded through the trash until I found the stairs to the third floor in the front of the building. I followed the stairs up, and as I approached the door I started to feel that something wasn't right. It was warm, not just because I was out of the winter wind and in an enclosed space in full winter garb, it was physically warmer. I approached the door and turned the knob slowly with my gloved hand. I made no noise, but it turned completely. As I started slowly pushing the door open as quietly as I could, I was hit with a blast of heat that fogged up my glasses. Inside the cracked open door, I could see that there was indeed power. As I opened the door the rest of the way, I found myself in a kitchen with eaten food on the table, used and still smoking cigarettes in a cup, and a gas kitchen stove with all 4 burners on high. That explained the heat. I stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked around. Since it was an attic apartment, it was exceedingly small. The kitchen was no more than 10 ft 10 feet, and because of the staircase leading into it was shaped like an L. There was a living room off to the side that was darkened, a single bathroom, and to my left towards the front of the house was a single bedroom. It was there that I heard sounds. People talking. I stood still in the doorway listening for a minute until I realized what I was hearing was a television tuned to Judge Judy. I worked my way towards the bedroom and could see the television playing in the corner through the partly open doorway. When I reached the doorway, I opened it slightly and looked inside, ready to run if I saw a person in there. I didn't, but what I saw was kinda worse. The bedroom was barely larger than the bed that was in it. The television was crammed into the corner, stacked on top of some milk crates. Also, there were some damaged computer speakers and other electronics that I could tell had been salvaged from the dumpster behind Office Max, being somewhat of a veteran dumpster diver myself. There was more than one set of speakers, some even had subwoofers with them. But there was also an old VCR stacked inside the crates with cables going both into the TV, and into the other corner of the room. I followed the cables and found more crates, filled with camera batteries, and chargers, an old TXCD DVD duplicator, and on top of the top crate was a semi-bent tripod. Things were starting to click with me at this point, but turning back to the bed clinched it for me. The bed had no blankets, only a single pillow and a bed sheet on the mattress. A sheet that had red splotches towards the center of it. As I turned to start heading back out, I noticed handcuffs hanging off the bedpost. That was it. I walked as quickly but as quietly as I could back down the stairwell, and instead of going through the apartments below again, I took it straight down to the bottom floor, where I found the front door unlocked. I got out of there as fast as I could, took my bike, and rode off with a sigh of relief. 3 months later, the house burned down. Probably late to the party, but here's a story. My family had access to a haunted house while it was being renovated to a restaurant, a house on the National Haunted Registry, if you believe in that sort of thing. Anywho, my cousin wants to stay overnight for her 18th bay. So, being excited, I go all out on ghost hunting. I look up paranormal teams and what they use to hunt ghosts. I'm not a believer, but hell, you only get one shot at this, so may as well go for it all. So, the night of, we took multiple walks through the 3-story mansion. The entire top floor was burned after a fire many years prior. It was safe but not in great shape and just added to the spooky feel. As I'm recording and creeping through this long hallway, these eyes shine from the corner and come cruising at me. A bat flies by my head and I just about myself. I didn't find any ghosts that night, but I did quickly find a bathroom. A couple of my friends and I once went on a hike, it was more like a nature walk, to a little waterfall in Malibu. Once we got to the waterfall, though, we were super unimpressed, drought years, but I noticed the rock face next to it was very climbable. We end up climbing this pretty unsure rock face, half hiking, half climbing, until we get to the top just in time to see a beautiful sunset and take pictures on my friend's camera. We left our phones in the car. Big mistake. Once the sun sets, we realize our problem. It was going to be too dangerous to head back down the steep and loose rocks in the dark. I turn around and notice a very random house behind us. Everything about this house was strange. There was no road or path towards it, no yard or landscaping, but it looked like a very new construction, complete with vinyl siding and windows, all high-quality housing materials. The weird thing, other than there being no path, was that the sliding door was unlocked, and when I opened it I walked into what was one giant room, dirty floors, and one wooden bench sitting in the middle. Inside this giant room was another room, taking up maybe January 8th th of the space, with no windows and a locked door. I tried to get in, the whole atmosphere was super weird and creepy, so my friends hurried me up. We went back outside, noticed the only light nearby was a mobile home with a weird giant structure next to it made out of branches and sticks all leaned together. Looked like you could fit 8 people under this mound shape. We decided that looked a little too hills have IZY, so we set off down a path which took us up to a giant fence of someone's backyard. We had no way around, steep rock on both sides, so we hopped his fence and ran along the side of the yard, hopping the front fence, and walking along the road. We were in some sort of gated community, but the weird thing was every single home was completely dark. It was like no one in these 30 homes were actually home. We found one house with lights on and a car in the driveway, so we went up to ask for directions or a phone to borrow, but no one answered. Dumb, but I tried the door, it was open, of course, and I hollered inside asking if anyone was home and could help us because we were lost. Nothing. This had to be a $2 or $3 million home and it was just unlocked and empty on a Saturday night. We continue waking, hop the gated community entrance, and follow the road downhill with our thumbs up. Every car passes us by until one van drives by and slams on its brakes a bit past us. The driver door opens, and a man yells, "You boys lost?" "Yes sir," we respond. "Get lost on a hike after climbing some rocks? Had to hop a fence to get to the road?" "You." "Exactly." I respond. "That was my house," he says, and then puts the van in reverse. We got super scared and froze for a good 20 seconds with no movement, his foot still on the brake. It felt like an eternity before he put the car in drive and left. Thought we'd be mowed down for sure. Ended up having to walk the PCH in the dark for about 5 miles before we made it to our car, passing tons of scary stuff, the creepiest being an abandoned ice cream truck with hundreds of eyeballs painted on it. I really want to revisit that old house thing and find out why it was built and what's in the room. Thanks for reading, sorry it's long, but it was freaky. Buddy and I are in Costa Rica in a smaller town called Coweta for some fun. Nice small town, highly recommend it. We are out in the town on our second night there and have a nice candlelit dinner by the ocean, having a bottle of wine while at it. We go to a bar afterwards and have several more drinks. I decide to walk some sweet old lady from the States home. She had moved to Costa Rica some years ago and lives in a place all on her own down a jungle road. Halfway there I realized I had no clue where I was or where my friend was. I turn around and start walking back the way I came, drunkenly, on a road made out of lots of fist-sized rocks. Luckily, we found each other again somehow, on a back jungle road, in the middle of the night, no one in sight. At this point, very drunk, for whatever reason, we decide to do a little ecstasy. So, we are having an enjoyable time. Walking along the road I see a building through the trees. It is a decent-sized 2-story bungalow-type structure that looks abandoned. Windows boarded up, no lights, etc. I love urban exploring, so we tromp on through the brush to the building. There is a handmade ladder going to the second-floor balcony. Front door/windows are bolted/nailed shut tight, so we climb the ladder. We get up there, drunkenly stumbling around having a grand old time, and he starts banging on the door up there and trying to pry it open. I see an opening in the overhanging ceiling and after a boost from my friend crawl up into the ceiling looking for a way in. I was certain I could get in that way. As I am up there I hear rapid footsteps on wood, and then a door slam opens down below. I freeze in place. I see my friend down below raise his hands as I hear angered shouting in Spanish. My friend backs up and I peer down the balcony and see a man with a machete raised threateningly shouting at my friend, only a few feet away. He has no knowledge of my existence and I realize I might see my friend murdered at any second. My friend is saying how sorry he is and in his drunken state forgets that he kind of knows a decent amount of Spanish and is babbling about how he's stupid and he'll leave, and he was just trying to have fun. I am watching, waiting with my breath held. After a moment, the man lowers the machete. I decided this is an enjoyable time to announce my presence. Without warning I drop down from the opening onto the balcony between them and say, "Buenas noches." The man takes a step back surprised, but does not raise his machete. He screams, "No buenas noches. You go back to where you came from now," to which I respond, "Si, lo sent mucho. We turn, hoping not to die, and descend the very tiny, very rickety ladder to the ground, about 15 feet below, and get the hell out of there. Unfortunately, we had both taken our shoes off to climb said ladder, and in our haste forgotten to grab them. So, we drunkenly made our way back to our cabin in the dark middle of the night, on that horribly rocky road without shoes, drunk and high on adrenaline and life. It was a rough morning, but at least we were alive. I and my friends used to cycle about the neighborhood as kids. We knew our immediate area, but as kids we started exploring further reaches. Now we were in a city, so it was just a jungle of buildings. Or so we thought. We were doing the usual, racing about or playing cycle tag while going further and further out. The sun was going down, so we decided to return home, but as we had gone afar we decided to take a shortcut through some apartment complexes instead of following the road. As we were going through we ran into a path of thorny bushes which after some time completely blocked the path. We would have doubled back, but we felt we came too far to turn back. So, we forced our way through using our cycles as an unbelievably bad bushcutter. Before I knew it, we were completely surrounded by the bush, we couldn't see anything else, we didn't even know if we were heading on the right path. It was only the sky and thorny bushes. We would have been fine if not for even the elder guys getting freaked out. I got scared, but we kept moving forward somehow. Finally, after a lot of pushing through we came across an opening, and a forest. A bloody forest as far as the eye can see right in the middle of a city. It's not supposed to be there, the city goes much farther than the spot we were at, and nobody mentioned a huge forest when we're growing up there. We were supposed to run into a city road that led somewhere near our neighborhood, but there was nothing. We could only see trees in the front, and the hugest thorny bushes at the back. Like we went through a portal or something. We got totally freaked and doubled back and again had to fight the bushes, and got back to the road, and went the long way back home. As kids we were half scared and half excited. We talked about it for a while but soon forgot about it. But looking at it now, it was kind of freaky. Decades later I came back to the city and reminisced with my old friends. The city has changed in layout, and the paths we took as kids no longer exist, and oddly enough he said he hasn't run into the forest again. We laughed, but I have my suspicions lol. I was exploring a massive old toy and game factory built in the 60s with a friend of mine. Due to the time it was built, it had a fallout shelter in the basement which was still fully stocked. It was complete with cases of medical supplies, carbohydrate supplements, a room filled with cans of water. So, we are walking around, and we keep getting startled by echoes on this 250,000 square foot factory floor which all turn out to be pigeons. Then we hear footsteps. This factory is well sealed up as the only way was to remove a panel from a wooden garage-style door and crawl through. We stopped walking for a second for better listening and they sound really far away but getting a little louder, so we booked it to our exit. Due to the time size of this hole in the door, I have to take my backpack off and put it through first. As soon as I took it off and placed it on the other side, I saw a truck pointed right at me from the corner of the hole. I am freaking out knowing there is absolutely no way the truck didn't see me, and I relay this to my friend right next to me. Just a moment later the truck starts to move, and I hope it is just leaving but it pulls closer to our escape route. At this point I realized that out goose is cooked as I have been holding my hand outside frozen in place for what felt like minutes. I eventually decided that the truck would see me, and I should just break out my doing a school photography project story. I go up to the truck and start talking and he just looks at me and says, "Dude, I don't care what the hell you were doing in there, I thought you were a raccoon, and I was about to take out my .22 if you didn't pop out just when you did." Turns out exterminators are pretty cool dudes. I haven't been back to this location successfully since they have revamped their alarm system, but I am still continually active in the New England area. I rarely run into anything scary or horrifying, usually it is just other explorers, taggers, or homeless and they are always chill as long as you aren't. I know this story wasn't too much, but it's the best one I have lol. There's an old abandoned mental institution by my house we broke into one summer. There was also a prison, juvenile ward, police HQ, and fallout shelter all attached via underground tunnels. We found ourselves at the end of the fallout shelter, an exceptionally long underground tunnel with childlike paintings all over the walls and 2 large jail cell doors at the beginning and end. Both were opened. We got to the end of the tunnel and there was a final stairwell that went down to pitched blackness. All we could see via our flashlights was an individual chair in the middle of what seemed like a large pitched black room. We opted not to enter and turned to head back down the tunnel. About halfway through we heard a loud bang. The problem is the acoustics were insane in this tunnel. It sounded like they came from everywhere. We stayed calm. I suggested nobody run or someone will get hurt, and briskly get out of that building. I can't say for certain, but it really felt like the noise came from behind us. At the time I assumed it was the cell door. I wasn't going to look then, but I really want to go back now. I was exploring an abandoned hospital built in the 1930s in an isolated mountainy area to cure tuberculosis. The building wasn't very welcoming in itself. Very communist style. But the mountains around made it a wonderful place thanks to the view. I started by visiting the several floors. Bedrooms, restaurant, administration, church, cinema, swimming pool, there was everything in this huge building to make life possible for an extended stay, so it was a remarkably interesting exploration. Some hallways seemed like burnt. The walls were smoke black. But there wasn't any trace of actual fire, burned things or melted plastic. This fits the place, so I didn't worry more about it. I decided to keep the basement as dessert. Once I went there things were quite different. Technical rooms, storage of all kinds of stuff, like a room full of toilets, and of course almost no natural light with add to the dark ambience that I kind of like. I went along an exceptionally long hallway with all kinds of pipes going through. I don't remember exactly the map of the building because it was years ago, but I remember that it was at the extremity of the hallway. The last room. I entered what seemed to be a little library. Maybe kindergarten. But why in the basement? Nothing really special there, so I turned back to exit the room and I saw it. On a pillar, there was a wide trace of living stuff explosion. Red liquid dripping along the wall, solid parts rotting. Everything indicated that someone's head exploded at this exact place, and I was looking at brain parts sticking a pillar inside a kindergarten. I decided it was time to end this exploration. I tried to explain to myself what else it could be but couldn't find any other explanation. Even if I had never seen a crime scene or anything like that before, I couldn't see anything that a shotgun at someone's head. On the way back upstairs, I decided to use an emergency exit that shouldn't be locked since my way in was a bit tricky. I went to the end of a hallway and opened the door. To my surprise, this wasn't the exit but a kind of tunnel going upward with stairs. The potential frustration of missing a cool part of the building pushed me to go in despite the crime scene I just saw. After all, it's far away and what has been done is done. The tunnel went to a separate little house. I guessed it was the house of the director who built his own direct tunnel to the hospital so he could travel between the two without going out in the cold and snow. The tunnel made me enter the house from the basement. The first thing I saw when I entered was a door with a wide hole inside. Through the hole I could see a creepy room with only a mattress and a dead fox lying on it. The creepiest part were the walls. They were covered with handwritings, very scary. I'm going to kill the spider in my head, she doesn't want to stop talking, don't yell I'm already dead, dozens of sentences like this. It went all over the room. A pile of books was sitting next to the mattress. And that's it. At this point I decided I had seen enough of this place. I went back home trying to convince myself that all of this had a logical explanation. The confirmation came a few days later. Looking for informations online about the place, I discovered that there was a movie filmed in this place a few years earlier. I found it and watched it. It was a serious movie with a semi-famous French actor. I don't remember airing in cinemas, but maybe it did. And of course, it was a zombie movie. It was very funny to watch a movie filmed entirely in this hospital. The plot was that an ambulance was stuck because of the snow and had to stop in this weird place. And then, zombies. Nothing amazing, but it explained the dark walls that were made creepy for the movie as well as the shotgun. I was right. A brain exploded there. But it was a zombie brain. So, in the end, nothing was creepy anymore in this building. Well, not in the hospital. But the house. The movie never took place in a separate house. The room would have had so much meaning in the scenario. No cut scene here. No explanation. Told went to an abandoned hospital and a related house. Saw traces of murder in the hospital and a room where someone had been kept prisoner in the house with only a mattress, books, and creepy inscriptions on the walls. Discovered afterwards that a zombie movie had been filmed in the hospital that explained all the blood and creepy stuff in the hospital. Realized the house and its room were not in the movie and didn't fit the scenario. My best friend and I explored an abandoned news station in high school that happened to be on the same hill as an abandoned mental hospital and, from what I've heard, orphanage. The hospital was completely fenced off and apparently they had cameras watching it at all times, so that was a no-go. I've explored the news station before, but this time was on a cloudy, rainy day, so that added to the spook factor. We walked around for maybe 30 minutes before we started hearing someone cough, so we noted out. The picture below is from when my friend stuck his camera through a hole in the wall and filmed around. I have no idea what the figure on the left actually is, but it's always creeped me out. We wanted to go back a few weeks later but decided to go have dinner instead. About an hour later his parents called and told us the building was completely engulfed in flames. I was exploring an abandoned facility at one point owned by a defense contractor. The place is up in the hills, near a pretty large chunk of residents surrounding the hill. To get to the fence you need to hike 3 miles, followed by another mile to get to the buildings after the other mile. This place was originally like 800 acres but is now down to about 700 after developers began building near it. The place is super contaminated with uranium, perchlorate, Agent Orange, and other chemicals. I had a gas mask and protective coveralls on, so I would imagine I already looked pretty creepy. Well, it turns out that there is a guard at the facility 24/7, and maybe another party or two also exploring. We all heard noises caused by the other party, so we kept avoiding each other. While the guard was searching for us, we were avoiding him and the other group, who we thought was military personnel. If we got caught. Well, anyways, turns out the other group was avoiding me because they got nervous with my choice of uniform, and the guard was searching for me to see what my intentions were. I found some rubble from a building that was probably destroyed some time earlier. Well, it turns out that the destroyed building was the protective observation deck for explosive mine testing back in the day, and the field still contains some remaining landmines. We heard a loud explosion and saw bloody chunks flying everywhere. I thought I was in the deepest hit I could possibly be in, with people blowing up while following me. Turns out there are cows in the hills. As a young man in rural Alabama, I would explore an old brick house that burned down in the 1940s that we, my cousins and I, called the Breakdown House. It was totally isolated in the woods, and very overgrown. All that was left were 3 walls and a chimney, the concrete slab of the foundation, and globules of melted glass strewn about the area. When I was over at my grandparents' house, way out in the country, like 2 miles to the next door neighbor, the cousins and I would go around out there, not like that, we're not that kind of Alabaman. It never scared me and was more just cool than anything else. Until I found an eviscerated dog hanging from a tree there. One day I went and there was literally a dog corpse strung up from a tree, like someone had skinned and gutted it. It was definitely a dog. There was what looked like an empty tent further up the hill, tucked up behind a stand of trees. And it looked like somebody lived there. There were clotheslines with children's clothing on them, and more beer cans than you can count just thrown on the ground. Must have been over 100. I guess it might have been a hobo family or something. But the spectacle of it was just very unsettling. A butchered dog and clotheslines with Winnie the Pooh children's clothing on them. I never went back. There used to be an abandoned sanitarium not far from where I live. A couple of friends and I explored it one time during the day and decided to go back later that night. There were several buildings on the premises, some big, some small. The first scare was when a patrol car rode through the property and shined his lights through the building we were in. Come to find out later that the security company that patrolled the property couldn't enter any of the buildings because of insurance reasons. After he left we hung around inside for a bit to make sure the coast was clear, we ran across the parking lot through another building to get to the path where our car was parked when out of nowhere there was an echoing scream that sounded like someone was in excruciating pain. After that I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. I'm a huge fan of getting out of the city and taking photos of abandoned homes, factories, etc. 3 summers ago, I was at an abandoned home in rural Kentucky. It was one of those places I always intended to go shoot, I just never got around to it. After driving about 30 minutes into the country, I found the place. It was the only time I've really felt creeped out as I parked and grabbed my gear. I was standing in the overgrown drive kind of assessing how badly I wanted to go inside. I decided to go ahead despite my initial fear of the place. Once I got inside, it was a wonderful place to photograph, something right out of a horror flick. I kept looking over my shoulder like I was being watched. No matter where I went in the house, this uneasiness persisted. I went upstairs, through all the old bedrooms, pretty much every part of the home before I decided to try the basement. The double doors were on the floor, giving me this scary gaping doorway to enter. It was really too dark to shoot without a flash, and every time I would snap a shot, my mind would get carried away. In the very back of the basement I saw a light source. It was a newly lit candle. I immediately got the hell out. I get to the top of the stairs and make an abrupt turn and run right into a huge homeless guy. I went into a fighting stance like some kind of weird person, and this guy says, "I've been watching you take pictures the whole time." I would have said hey, but I didn't want to spook you. He offered to burn a door with me. I chose to peel out and almost wrecked my car on the way out. I still do this, but never alone. The first time I did this after my run-in, I carried my .22 with me. An old rotten 3-story house. I live in the north woods of Wisconsin. Up here there are a lot of hidden places to find. Mostly because over the years, many people like to hide out here. Al Capone had several beach houses and hides, for example. Me and a couple of friends went searching for a house we heard was haunted once. We didn't find the supposed haunted house, but we found an old hidden driveway. It was too overgrown to be seen from the road. We just happened upon it while searching on foot. A week later, we went back to see what was at the end. We found a 3-story Victorian, pretty rotten and derelict. We got in through a hole in the wall that was in the back, worked our way past bushes and prickers, but we made it. Most of the place was gutted, and we had to tread pretty carefully. There were rotten patches on the floors, so we had to be careful. This was old, and I mean old. The plumbing was ancient, no electrical outlets to be found, and old oil lamp sconces. We worked our way to the second floor and found a couple of bedrooms, what we thought was an office or study and a powder room. No cool antiques though. We got so caught up in it that we were there until dark when we made it to the basement. There were 2 ways down. We used the stairs in the back because the front seat seemed too unsafe. There we found an old furnace, a coal chute, and a couple of storage rooms. There wasn't much light down there. The bushes outside covered the windows, so the only light came in from the hole in the upper floor. The thing is that it was getting dark by the time we started snooping down there, so by the time we noticed it was already pretty dark out. We know what we are doing, so we had the basics, 1 med kit, a light for each, and a rope we carried just in case. After looking around we found some back storage rooms, both with thick metal doors. The first was already open and empty, the second was rusted shut. We didn't want to give up, so we found some old cast iron railings that fell from who knows where, and we pried that sucker apart. I say apart because first the handle came off, then we suck railing through the hole with the rope and just pulled it open. Took us a better part of an hour to do all that considering, but we were stubborn, and we wanted to see what was in there. The room had no window, so it was pretty dark. What we found was a bunch of old filing cabinets and a small desk with a chair. Most of the cabinets were seized shut due to age, but the ones we got open just had old documents. Nothing seemed special about the place, and by this point we were getting pretty tired. We finally noticed it was dark, so we decided to head back out. As we were slowly making our way back up the steps, we started to hear a howling sound from the basement. It got really loud, and we got really freaked out. We paused long enough to search with our lights where it may have been coming from, but after that fear took us and we get out of there. After we calmed down and safely a few miles away back on the highway, we started to talk about it. A friend figured it was actually the old coal furnace and the above chimney. Like when you blow over the lip of a bottle that made the sound, but for the fun of it we all decided it was just an angry spirit that got past because we were searching through him. Much better than exploring an old maybe haunted house any day. So back in the late 80s the company I worked for was running security cables in the old tariff building down by the Wall Street Bull statue. I was with my supervisor at the end of the day, and he wanted me to show him what we did in the basement. So, we go down there, and the stairwell door opens into a T corridor, say going left/right. Our job was directly to the left, so we turned and went that way. I stop with him because we see a guy at the other end of the corridor, to the right, about 150 to 200 foot away. All we could see was that the guy was wearing a blue jumpsuit, like machinists wear, and a blue hard hat. We are curious why anyone would be down here at this time. So, I showed him what we did on the left-hand side of the corridor and decided to go back. There's no sign of the guy. We were right by the stairway door. So, we went down the corridor to where the guy was standing, and it ended in a dead end. WTF? Where did this guy go? Who the F is in the building this late at night? We go upstairs where the security guards are and are pretty freaked out. The guard goes to see what happened, so we go, is there anyone else working in the building? The guard goes, not why? My supervisor goes, we just saw someone down in the basement. And before he could say another word the guard goes, in a blue hard hat? We were like WTF yes. The guard opens a drawer, a big file cabinet drawer, it's full of these old ledger bank books, he tells us to write down what we saw. I asked him what's all this? He goes, that guy has been sighted since the 1940s. We are like, come on man, seriously. The guard tells us that when they were renovating the basement in the late 40s, there was a cave-in, and this one guy died. There's been sightings of this man ever since. Major creepy. We were exploring an old bridge building including the tower thingy. The bottom part of the bridge was where the engine and hydraulics used to be, so now it was just a big open space with lots of each oaking. At one point we are split up, 2 of us in the tower and 2 of us at the bottom in the big open space. Suddenly it sounded like Wiki broke loose. We heard loud bangs all around the building and lots of screaming. The 2 of us at the bottom of the building ran up to the tower and we all just sat on the latch of the tower entrance. The bangs and screaming continued for a while. After about 30 minutes it stopped, and a little while later we went outside to see what was happening. No one there, but there probably was a group of teenagers who thought it would be funny to try scare the living out of us. They sure did. About a year ago, some friends and I set out to explore Edgewater Hospital in Chicago. Hillary Clinton was born there, as well as some other people of note, so we decided to go check it out. I wouldn't call us professionals, but we do have a bit of experience with Chicago's urban scene. The only entrance we could see was a pipe that ran overhead from an opposite building into the complex of the abandoned hospital. We shimmied across the pipe and climbed in. It was at this point I lost my hat to barbed wire. Too bad, because I'm never going back for that thing. We hop off the pipe and climb into a window. My friend's arm got a small cut from the glass, so we sat down inside the darkroom to fix it up. We always carry first aid, as well as suture kits. I'm pre-med. Once we are done tending to say friend, we stand and don our masks, the place teeming with asbestos. It appears we've made it to some sort of patient wing and begin to proceed down a hallway. It's dark, but luckily we came prepared. Bring flashlights and headlamps out of our bag, we continue down the hall. The ceilings are hanging low in some areas, and the floor whines as you walk across it. The place is not as stable as I'd like it to be. We continue down the hall and we begin to see what I've come to know and love whenever I explore these types of places. The graffiti. I don't do it myself, but seeing the usual do not pass or warning, enter at your own risk, and even the occasional male genitalia spray painted on the wall makes me feel at home. I love Urbane, I'm in my element here. We come to a nurse's station, which is covered in files. Some of them read deceased. We move our flashlights to the rooms surrounding the station, where we see curtains drawn covering rooms that have long since been emptied. I see one of the curtains begin to drift, but I assume it's a draft. It is freezing, despite it being midsummer. We continue down the hall, pushing through tile, our boots crushing building matter and what seems like thousands of files. Eventually, we arrive at S staircase, where we opt to go down. Big mistake. As we descend, I begin to get this weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. My friends and I have a rule: if someone gets bad vibes and wants to dip, we dip, because of an incident at an abandoned school, but that's a bit too personal for me to post. However, out of excitement I put it down. The stairways end in the morgue. At first, we didn't realize. It was a pitch-black room, but it smelled awful. I would opt to stand next to a garbage can on a hot summer's day than to smell what I smelled there again. Of course, there were probably no bodies in there, since they cleared the place out of stuff, but the smell still lingered. We move our flashlights into the room. This is when it goes wrong. The minute our beam of light meets the room, we all tense up, and I can hear a friend uttering obscenities under his breath. The room was covered in blood. Or so we thought. We later found out it was rust, but hey, it's a morgue, it's dark, adrenaline running. The opposite wall is lined with rust-covered cabinets, and the side walls have large tubs. We poke around for a bit. Meanwhile, I can sense everyone's on high alert. I myself had begun to sweat profusely, and feel an odd feeling in my stomach, the very same from earlier. I just keep getting bad vibes, and I ask my friends if we can leave. I am cut off by a vigorous rattle. Our beams of light all turn to one side of the morgue, where a large tub with an overhanging faucet is. I swear to this day that I've never been more terrified in my life. The faucet had begun to rattle profusely. My friends and I booked it back up the stairs back to where we started. Apparently, this caused a lot of noise as on-site security caught up to us. Told us to get out of there, or he'd call the police. On our way out, the man seemed to relax, and we started asking him questions about the place. Anyways, we file out and he tells us the usual don't come back or else bullshit. Except, at the end he makes a point of telling us that a kid died on the roof tagging a transformer, which had subsequently exploded. Whether or not this is bullshit, I don't know. I just know I get bad vibes from Edgewater Hospital. A friend of mine and I were exploring an old factory that was shut down for poisoning the water supply in the area 30 years before. The area was contaminated with lead and the factory was left pretty much unchanged aside from being partially gutted of machines. Inside the maintenance/locker room area there was a long hallway with doors to various rooms. It was pitching black inside, even in broad daylight. We navigated the corridors with flashlights. The air smelled of mold, and felt cold and damp, but the ground was dry and dusty. The lead paint was peeling off the ceiling, the thick flakes of paint hanging looked like the room had been feathered. A lot of the flakes had fallen off and littered the floor. They made a satisfying crunch as we crept through. Inside one of the rooms there was a sliver of light bleeding out of an old double door and spilling into the hallway. Naturally, this caught our attention, and we eased inside. The light turned out to be sunlight as these doors lead outside. The room was their laundry room. I assume it was for uniforms. There was a huge dryer still in there that we ventured one of us could fit in. I volunteered and climbed in. To my surprise, it still spun freely as the bearings had remained in good health throughout the years. I braced myself and told my friend to try spinning it. I wagered I could survive a few revolutions unscathed. We spent a few minutes taking turns spinning around in this big dryer. Being teenagers, this was as much fun as we had hoped for in this creepy old factory. My turn had come around again, and just as I had begun to rock back and forth gaining momentum, I looked to my friend for the extra push, but he didn't help. His demeanor had instantly changed. He was pale, almost shaking, distracted, looked like he had seen a ghost. Shah, stop. He whispered in panic. What? WTF is the matter? Listen. Do you hear that I hurried out of the dryer before coming to complete silence and lending an ear? From the pitch-black corridor comes a familiar sound from only moments ago. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was the paint chips on the ground getting crunched very slowly. Someone or something was creeping towards us in the pitch-black catacomb-like hallways of this decrepit factory. We had been everywhere in the factory, and not a soul or even a small animal was to be seen. The footsteps did not slow down or speed up, but they were getting louder. Crunch. We both looked at each other in disbelief and utter terror. Who could this be? What could this be? Why are they sneaking up on a cacophony of creaking dryers and laughter at the pitch-black unknown? There was no time to entertain these questions. I turned to the double doors from where the sunlight was leaking and heaved myself onto them. They gave out an awful noise amidst the temporary silence and crackling of paint, but didn't budge. My friend joined in, and finally, they started to give way. We resorted to kicking them for the final blow, and they burst open. I had never been so happy to see sunlight, dead grass, and rusty fences in my life. We bolted, never looking back, never going back, and never knowing what we could have encountered in that wretched, dark, and creepy corridor. In my town there was an old insane complex spread out through multiple buildings. Not one giant building like most people think of. Most of it has been torn down or repurposed over the years. However, one of the buildings that remained looked to be an old radio room or something. As I was walking around this small room, I noticed stairs that lead below. The basement of the building was flooded around 2 feet high. Around this time, I remembered they built maintenance tunnels throughout the complex and thought this would be a good entrance. I left and came back with boots and waders. When I got down to the basement there was just trash floating around, but the entrance to the tunnels was bricked off. Then I tripped on something as I stopped to look around and take it in. I realized their bottom was filled with various animal parts, bones, Then I looked down. There was a dog that was obviously killed by human hands. It was cut open just lying there on the shallow side, maybe an inch or two of water. I apparently stumbled on some deranged person's animal sacrifice room. I got out of there really fast. A week later someone set the building on fire. There's an old, abandoned factory in my city that's been shut down for about 40 years now, and since it was abandoned people have explored and left weird stuff in certain rooms. There's a whole room filled with 80s memorabilia, never opened cassettes, old dolls, etc. Of course, there's the usual graffiti, creepy writing on the wall and symbols that are supposed to look like they're part of some ritual. Like any abandoned place, there's a lot of urban legends surrounding it. No believable claims, but they're enough to freak people out. A couple of years back my friend and I decided to go check it out. Once we get there we circled the whole factory trying to find the best way to get in, and it looks pretty much boarded up. The old loading docks are locked to the ground to keep them from opening, windows boarded up, metal doors locked and chained. We finally found a rolling door that looked like it could open up. It takes about 30 minutes, but we're able to get it about a foot or so off the ground, enough for us to army crawl under. Looking around the room, there's some old moth-eaten mannequins and a bent-up bike, but nothing too unusual or creepy. We walk about 10 feet into the room when we hear a chuckle coming from the corridor maybe 50 feet away. Like a deep throaty laugh. Needless to say, we booked it out of there pretty fast. Back when I was in high school, I drove by an old, abandoned farmhouse every day. It was beautiful, lace curtains in the windows, and it always intrigued me. One day, my best friend and I decided to do a little exploring. We skipped our last period of class and headed to the farmhouse. In order to get onto the property, we had to climb a fence, but it was easy enough to do. Once we got onto the property we realized that there were several buildings, but they were mostly collapsed or taken over by overgrowth. There was also a ton of debris in the yard around the house. The windows in the house had all been broken, so there were broken dishes, old moldy books, and strips of lace curtains. We started getting uneasy when we realized that the house had been abandoned for at least a few decades, and it was obvious that whoever lived there left everything they owned. It was like they left to run errands one afternoon and never came back. We went through the back door, which opened up into the kitchen. Behind the trash and leaves, there was an old, 50s-style refrigerator and a bunch of other old appliances, nothing out of the ordinary. We could see through a little hallway into the living room, which had all the old furniture in it, but we couldn't get to it because the floor had rotted through. We walked into the next room, which looked like it was originally a dining room. This was the only room where the original furniture had been removed. There were makeshift shelves all around the walls, and covering those shelves were baggies of bullets. Thousands of them. There were shell casings all over the floor of this room as well. Everything from BBs to shotgun ammo. I am by no means a gun/ammunition expert, but my friend recognized some of the types. We got pretty freaked out and bolted. The next day at school, I told all my friends about the bullet-filled creepy farmhouse, and no one believed me. So, I decided to go back again. I took another friend with me, and when we went in the back door, the house had been gutted. The fridge, the curtains, the living room furniture, and most importantly, the bullet room, are all gone. I have no clue how they got the big living room furniture out over the rotten floor, or how they accomplished all of this in 24 hours. I can't imagine who was using that house and what they were using it for, but it scared me. I should mention that the house sat empty for another year or so before it was torn down. The other buildings on the property are still there though, still buried in the overgrowth. There used to be an abandoned psychiatric hospital in Kalamazoo, Michigan that my friends and I would explore on weekend nights in 2003. It was 4 floors plus a basement, which included a morgue, and we explored every nook and cranny of that place. Judging by the most recent magazines on the 4th floor waiting room, it seemed to have closed in 1990. The previous institution just up and left everything Chernobyl style: furniture, equipment, drugs, patient files, even found some suicide reports. By 2003, the place was broken and trashed by vandals while the building itself decayed. It looked worse than the hospitals in the Silent Hill games. That's not even the creepiest, most mysterious part. I once entered a room and saw a mirror that wasn't broken. Everything in this entire building was destroyed, except this one pristine mirror still mounted on the wall. I've never seen anything more out of place, and I get chills just thinking about it. My old college roommate has a knack for adventures, and he was always looking for cool places to explore. In the hall outside the cafeteria there was this big metal latch on the ground, and naturally he tried to open it. It wasn't locked. He immediately came back to the dorms to tell me about it, and we decided that night when no one was around we would go down there. Night came and we went inside. There was a small ladder with about 10 steps, which led to one long, pitch-black tunnel, so we got out our phones for lighting. At first we were super disappointed. We walked to the end of the tunnel, and it just dead-ended. Nothing of interest. That is, until we noticed a small door down near our feet, a little bigger than half our size, and wouldn't you know that it was also unlocked. Naturally, we had to go further. This new area was a lot smaller. It wasn't so small that we were crawling, but our knees couldn't fully extend. This new area was a lot larger too. It was a series of veined tunnels that were all strung together. We were down there for a solid half an hour exploring. We ran across a few doors, but they were all locked. Then we turned down this one tunnel, and it felt like that area in the beginning of Ocarina of Time, when you're first learning you can crawl through holes, just a small hole that was big enough to crawl through. We shined our lights down on it, and it wasn't exceptionally long. We'd only be crawling for a few seconds before arriving at the other side. We knew we had to do it. And so, we got on our hands and knees and crawled on in there. The other side had one corner and then a door. Naturally, we tried to open it, and this one was unlocked. It honestly may not seem freaky just reading, but there was this wave of discomfort that washed over us. We opened the door, and we found a small room. In the middle of the room was a table and a single chair, with one very dimly lit lantern sitting on the table. My friend and I took one look at each other and noted it out of there. We went as fast as could back through the crawly hole, through the small tunnels, into the big tunnel and back up the ladder. I know that the room was probably just some maintenance room or something like that, but something about the dimly lit lantern sitting on that lone table in the middle of a pitch-black room will always stick with me. Like something straight out of a horror film. We're staying at this hotel resort that used to be a ski resort, but the ski resort got shut down. No problem, still pretty nice. We walked through the mountains and everything, and it was a nice hike. Looked like it had some pretty awesome bike trails, but we forgot our bikes, so we never went riding. We drive into town that day to see my brother's band play, and pass by the old ski lodge overgrown with plants, obviously abandoned. Looked awesome. Me and my girlfriend say that we want to go check it out, and of course my sister and her boyfriend agree, although her boyfriend was a little hesitant. He wants to go into a field having to do a little bit with the law. I didn't ask my dad or stepmom, but of course my dad heard and decided he wanted to go too. It hits about 10 p.m. and we decide it's late enough that not many cars will be driving by, so we start walking down the street. It was a roundabout way, but it was better than walking through the overgrown fields. My dad decides he wants to go running through the fields and he is going to meet us there. We arrive and find a window, probably about 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet, not large, and it's broken. I climb on it, set up a table, and help everyone else through. Throughout the whole visit every once in a while someone would say, "SHH, turn your light off, a car's going to see it." They were so worried about it for some reason, but I'd turn my light off and then not be able to see because my eyes couldn't adjust. We're walking around and me and my girlfriend come to a room that's pretty packed with it, but there's a little hole in the wall, which leads to a crevice between two walls. I climb in to check it out, and the drywall is broken into another room. A room that was locked. I climbed in, held the drywall open for my girlfriend, and the first thing in the room was some sort of Chuck E. Cheese's massive mascot costume head. That was pretty creepy. We found 2 pairs of car keys, which probably were abandoned. My dad came in through the back door and met us, and we also found a fairly new door in the basement, with a brand new lock on it. I wanted to break it down, but I wasn't going to do that with basically my whole family there. We roamed around, and it was a little creepy, but we decided it was time to leave, mostly because everyone was outside except me and my girlfriend. We go to the window, and I see my dad, my sister, and her boyfriend outside saying they're ready to go. My girlfriend climbs in the window and is having a little trouble. She's taking her time, and it's been maybe half a minute since she's been trying to get through this window. Before I have a chance to say something, I start hearing very loud, purposeful stomping coming up the stairs. My girlfriend starts freaking out, as do I, because I'm stuck inside. There's a whole bunch of what are you doing and Jesus Christ go until she starts yelling that her feet's stuck, which I realize it is. I basically pop the foot out and she's out in a second, and I basically dive out the window. The second I'm out the window I turn around, and it's my dad. While my girlfriend was climbing through the window, my dad ran around back, snuck back in, and stomped up the stairs with us. I honestly don't think I've ever been so afraid in my life. I was literally stuck in that lodge with God knows who's stomping up the stairs. And I was not going to push my girlfriend out that window. So, I live in Sydney, and in a suburb about 45 minutes away from the city proper, is the haunted location delinquent youths like me went, simply called the Mafia House. It's a go-away massive mansion that you just don't see in Australia. Maybe in movies like Scarface or The Godfather, but not at the bottom of the world. The security wall out the front is full of bullet holes where a shootout happened, and there's a massive metal gate that tries, and fails, to keep stupid kids out. Anyways, it's a rite of initiation to go there and explore, so off we went. We climbed the fence, walked up the foreboding driveway with trees on both sides like rich people have, and we saw this giant foreboding house. We walked up the stairs, and there's these massive doors with no handle or any place to get a hold of, so there was no getting in that way. We walked around the back and saw this beautiful pool, but it was empty, and hella deep. It actually went under the house a little as well. We look inside and it's freaking hard to see, but there's all this furniture covered in layers of plastic, like old people have, and inches of deep dust. We searched around looking for an entryway, but it was locked up tight. Thankfully though, or unfortunately, we find a small opening trapdoor that goes under the house. We thought we could go under and maybe find an entryway, and so we had a look. Straight up, it was blacker than darkness should be, and the 3 of us that had the balls to get close instantly get a bad feeling. After a minute of trying to work up the courage to go in, all of a sudden a face, made of wind rushed towards us, went through us, and we heard a god-awful moan. We scrambled and ran a dozen meters away, decide to get out dodge, so we try to call our friends in the car that were coming. They pick up the phone, but it's just endless static. That was one creepy experience I'll never forget. The thing is though, I think something may have followed me home. Ever since then, I've always felt uncomfortable alone at home, and I get the usual haunting sort of symptoms a haunted house does. Doors open and shut, lights flick on and off, and sometimes I wake up and see something standing next to the bed and I start screaming. However, that being said, I've learned to deal with it, and I've never felt in fear of my life, like the fatally dangerous ghosts in the TV show Supernatural. As long as it stays that way, I can live with it. I went exploring some drainage pipes. We got in by wading in the river, and crawling into an outflow pipe. We crawled several hundred meters of pipe, I guess it was 3 feet in diameter. Enough to crawl in, and with an inch or two of water in the bottom. We found an occasional junction room where we could stand, with some kind of utility hole high up, so we weren't particularly deep. After a while, the pipes got really small, and I decided to push on through something that was just slightly bigger than my shoulder width. I had to lie on my belly and worm my way forwards. After having gone maybe 30 feet in, and around a slight curve, I saw it wasn't opening up any time soon, so decided to go back, and that's when it hit me. I couldn't. My arms were pinned to my side, obviously I couldn't turn around, I couldn't get any leverage. There was a serious moment of rising panic, and eventually I figured out that I could wriggle and just about inch my way backwards. It took at least 10 times longer to get back out of that, and that panicky claustrophobic horror creeps up on me from time to time even now, 10 years later. Exploring an abandoned winemaker's mansion in Portugal. TLDR evacuated in a hurry around the 1930s to 40s, unpaired ladies' shoes strewn everywhere, a baby doll wrapped in a rosary, secret passages stuffed with chairs? Tried to appease demon baby. Possibly acquired a course or two. It's an incredibly beautiful, possibly 100-year-old villa on the banks of the River Douro, crumbling hard, swallowed by vines and other types of vegetation, and surrounded by palm trees. It's a stunning place, but man, did it raise some spooky questions. My BF and I found it last year and spent a good chunk of the day exploring it. We went back this summer and the vines and wild grasses and whatnot had really taken over. Almost couldn't find it again. We had to wade through shoulder-high grass and ferns. Very prehistoric looking. Anyway, onto the creepy stuff. First off, before you even get to the house, you have to make your way through some serious wild grass, vines and company. The first sign that there used to be a mansion there is a shaded cave, which looks every bit as Victorian as you'd expect, with some carved stone benches overgrown with moss, and a natural spring at the back. Directly above the spring, however, there is a hole in the rock wall and a passage/tunnel just big enough for an adult to crouch down in and skitter along into the pitch darkness. Assuming you got over that, and retrieved your heart from the bottom of your stomach after staring into that abyss long enough that you could swear you saw someone in there, you'll find more caves in the rock wall below the house. The biggest one confirms that they are all a series of secret passages. The mouth of it is stuffed with some old chairs and a nightstand, presumably to keep nosy tourists out. Or to keep something in. Once you've recovered from that too, when you get to the house itself, the first thing you'll notice are these huge stone vats in the cellar which we assumed were used for making wine, and hundreds of dusty, mostly unlabeled wine bottles strewn everywhere. You need to watch your step. We found the doll on the first floor. As you advance down the first floor corridor, the first room to your left will look a lot like someone had been burning documents in a hurry in there. Like, 80 years ago. The floor is littered with random old shoes, mostly ladies, and burnt pieces of paper. None of the shoes have pairs. From what we could distinguish, the papers were some kinds of official records and the like, from the 1920s. Also, the floor is incredibly unstable. Might want to keep it close to the walls. As you keep going down the corridor, you'll find more cobweb shoes at random and cases upon cases of empty wine bottles. Both the shoes and the bottles look to be circa 1930s to 1940s. Finally, the demon baby doll. In the doorway to what looks like a used-to-be living room, you'll find an old, baby doll, possibly missing an eye. It'll be sitting on the doorstep in an ungodly, contorted position, cobwebbed all over. My BF and I decided to give it one last act of kindness and put it in this huge wooden trunk we found in the corner of that room. She seemed happier there. This summer, however, we found the baby doll on a table in the middle of the same room, wrapped in a string of rosary beads. Yes. Apart from rotting floors and spooky-looking curtains, there isn't much else on the first floor. However, if you manage to somehow make your way to the crumbling attic, you'll find an absolutely delicious surprise. And by delicious I mean creepy and puzzling as hell. While hanging around the mansion, we ran into an old man who apparently lived right next door. He said the house had been uninhabited and derelict for as long as he's lived there. 60-ish years. And you would definitely believe that, save for the attic. Even though the rest of the house looked like it had been hastily evacuated sometime in the first half of the 20th century, the attic had been inhabited as recently as the 90s, early 2000s. We found a child's room with modern-looking furniture, painted red and green, and school manuals from that time period. Also, collectible stickers like the ones you'd get in chewing gum in the 90s, some color photographs, and in the middle of the attic a room with the floor caved in under a huge pile of rotting leather/fabric/God knows what. The attic, to me at least, raised the most questions. Did the family move in? If so, how did the neighbor not see them? Why would they only occupy the attic? What about the rest of the house? We had to get out of there ASAP, however, as the whole structure was really unstable, and we could have dropped through the floors at any time. We're quite light, both of us, but we still had to walk close to the walls and only rest our entire weight on support beams and doorways. Of course, we took photos of the whole shebang. Of course, we plan to go back there until the house is completely engulfed by the small jungle around it. Of course, we wondered for a while after if we'd acquired a curse in the process.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.